Good morning, everyone. We're going to resume on HB 7 where we were left off from yesterday. It was read. I asked staff to read HB 7 back into the record for today.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. House Bill 7 by Representative Emerson is a proposed constitutional amendment which will revise Article 7 of the Constitution of Louisiana. Members, just to remind you, yesterday in committee, an amendment set was adopted. It was set number 28, so that set of amendments is still on this bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You may proceed.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Members, just briefly, this is the constitutional amendment piece that moves a lot of Article 7 into statute. It also exempts sales tax on prescription drugs at the local level, doubles the standard deduction for seniors. It adds money to the budget stabilization fund and phases out the revenue stabilization fund, and several other things that we discussed yesterday dealing with opting out on the local level with inventory tax. So if anyone has any questions ready, we will proceed and then, of course, hear from proponents and opponents.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We do have a couple questions. Chairman Willard.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Good morning, Madam Chair.
Good morning.
So, like I told you yesterday, I would go through the bill and come up with some questions. So, and I know
you were doing a lot of highlighting yesterday, so.
I did a lot of writing. I didn't do the highlighting. I know we touched on what we'll be doing with the UAL. So just to be clear, there's about $8 billion in the UAL that we owe, correct? And this would pay off $2 billion?
Yes.
Okay. So by reducing it by $2 billion, that results in $200 million in savings to school districts, a little over $200 million to school districts across the state?
Yes, and Miss Whitney with the TRSL might be here. Oh, there she is over there. She
Okay,
might,
cool.
You can ask her specific questions. I'm
Perfect.
just an amateur pension expert.
Good morning, Catherine
Good morning.
Whitney. I'm the Director of Teachers Retirement System. I also have our actuary here if necessary.
Okay, thank you, Madam Director. So just on the UAL portion, paying down $2 billion of the $8 billion saves school districts throughout the state about $200 million, a little over $200 million.
Right, so it reduces the annual payment that they would be required to make by about $207 million. That's based upon the projections of what would be applied to the UAL should all of this pass.
And so that carries forward year after year?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is there any, do we know how long that would occur, or does that number rise or decrease?
So I'll let Shelley go into a little more detail for you.
Okay.
My name is Shelley Johnson. I'm the actuary for Teachers Retirement System, and I prepared the projections with these numbers. So the payment, the savings, you can think of the UAL as like a mortgage, and it's a decreasing mortgage. So there's several mortgages that in total make up the UAL, and as those schedules are paid off, the payments decrease. So we're going to be with what this bill is proposing would for K through 12 reduce the payment by $207 million. And then that payment's gone forever. So they're
Right.
now making that payment, and that payment will be gone forever. There will be other schedules, but there's no reason to think any of those will be increasing and taking the place of this.
Okay.
So to answer your question, it's a schedule that would otherwise be paid off by 2040, and it's just going to pay it off now. So those payments just go away.
Okay. Thank you. Secretary, you done? I think yesterday you said there were, about a dozen school districts that would not realize savings enough to do $2,000 and $1,000 pay raises?
Yes, so we actually got those numbers from education yesterday, and it's about $15 to $20 million, depending on how much the payment would cost, but 15 million of that is the cost of the charter schools that don't participate in TRSL.
Okay.
So of all the districts that really their salaries are a little bit lower, it's only between about $1 million or so. I think $1 to $4 million that cost of those districts to just basically make those teachers and support staff whole.
Okay. And then the Rep. Bacala bill handles that, the gap.
So,
Is it guaranteeing that we're going to fund that?
So
that
it
gap?
doesn't guarantee that $20 million. What it basically requires this districts to give the teachers a pay raise up to the $2,000 and that $1,000, and then after that they have flexibility on how they spend the rest of the money. But the only way that we can really guarantee a recurring raise is through the MFP, which will be in the spring. And so the governor's committed to do that, and
to do it through the MFP.
To do it through the MFP. And so that's only, like I said, the total cost of that at maximum is now going to be $20 million versus the $200 we currently spend on the stipend.
Okay.
Also, there's a savings from making this payment on the other raises that we've guaranteed to the MFP, which almost offsets that full amount. So there is it would really be a minor amount of money in order to make the rest of them whole.
Okay. Just for my, I guess, research purposes, yesterday, we talked about the Southern Regional average for teacher pay. National average is close to 70,000. The Southern Regional average is about 60,000. I believe last year average teacher pay in Louisiana was around 54,000. So even with this $2,000 raise, we'll still be pretty below the Southern Regional average. So I thought that was something important for us to address, or at least bring up. On the 8G funds, the Education Quality Trust Fund, do you have examples of what those, because we're phasing that out, we're eliminating that through this bill, correct?
Yes.
You have examples of what dollars in that fund are currently being used for?
I think that might be some of the money that goes to early childhood. There's about, I think, a 50-50 split between the money that goes to higher ed and the money that goes to the K through 12 and early childhood. And I think in total, it's about $50 million is what the funds basically provide. I think on the higher ed side, they go to some professorships and scholarships. And so those are amounts that we're looking to just basically backfill that amount too. The local districts will have, like I said, some excess money from that payment that they can use to backfill some of that themselves if they want to. At the end of the day, though, we're looking to basically continue to find that money, and that's going to be in the hands of the legislature to appropriate out of all the savings that we get from doing this.
All right. So last night I did some digging on this too. It looks like those funds are used for pre-K programs throughout the state. They're used for LEAP assessments. They're used for professional development and recruitment of teachers. They're used for college and career readiness programs. It sounds like you were saying that some of the school districts will have more than a $2,000 and $1,000 to give teachers and support staff, and that they could use the extra to backfill these programs?
Yeah, there will be some districts that have that available. I mean, there will be actually a significant number that have money above that $2,000.
What about the ones who the state is going to have to jump in and make it whole to the $2,000 and $1,000?
Yeah, so there will be a significant amount of savings. I mean, between both the higher ed, save $76 million in UAL payments, and then the $200 million teacher stipend that we will no longer have to fund because it will be provided through this mechanism. I mean, there will be significant savings, and really that comes from the $1 billion in interest that we don't have to spend collectively. So there is significant money available for the legislature to appropriate for those causes. And that money right now is not constitutionally committed to where it goes. Mm-hmm. The Constitution and the funds just allocates and says you have to use it for these general purposes, right?
Right.
So it's not like we're taking away a protection. It's really just a more flexibility that you're going to have with the money now.
Okay.
And I will add one other thing about to your point on the teacher pay raises, or on the Southern Regional average. By making this payment, you're reducing the required contribution to the UAL when you give a teacher a pay raise. So right now you have to pay $1.21 for every dollar pay raise, right? And so after this, it'll be $1.15 or something like that. So there is
reducing the UAL.
Yeah, it lowers the barrier to give the teacher a pay raise, and the UAL cost is like 10% of all K through 12 educational spending in the state. So making this payment makes us or puts us in the right direction as far as making it easier to make those pay raises in the future.
Okay. Moving on to some of the property tax stuff, just had a couple of questions on that. So does this Article 7 rewrite now allow the legislature to enact property tax exemptions with a 2/3 vote? Is that what it's doing?
Yes.
Is it limited to certain types of property?
No.
That would include local bills as well?
So you mean like a local property tax
Parish.
exemption?
Yeah.
Yes, that could be done outside of the Constitution with the 2/3 vote.
No ratification from the municipal government or vote of the people, right?
No, it's just a
Okay.
2/3 vote.
Okay. This part had me a little bit confused. So we're removing the exemption for public property, correct?
No. So basically, we take all of the property tax exemptions with the exception of the homestead exemption remains in the Constitution. I think that there is an amendment in the works also to prohibit the legislature from mandating an inventory tax exemption. So the idea behind this, this proposal was to allow the locals the option of opting out. And so we wanted to make sure that they were comfortable that we weren't going to come back and force them to do it in the future. So I think there is an amendment in the works to do that. But other than that, the exemptions would be done by a 2/3 vote on the property side.
So none of it's going away. It's just being moved to statute with the 2/3
With
vote.
the 2/3 requirement.
Okay. All right. Moving on to Revenue Stabilization Fund. Why are we phasing that out right now?
Why do we phase out the Revenue Stabilization Fund? So I think the idea behind the Revenue Stabilization Fund was, altruistic, was, hey, we want to try and make our, kind of up and down cycles of corporate collections and severance collections more even. At the same time, they put kind of an arbitrary number of $600 million, which at the time had never been hit before for corporate collections. Mm-hmm. And since then, we basically hit it every year. And now we're depositing $1 billion a year into those corporate collections. At the same time, some portion of that revenue is a relatively volatile source of revenue. So that's part of the reason why we say, even if we get rid of the Revenue Stabilization Fund, we still use 15%, and we use that to either fund the Budget Stabilization Fund or goes to non-recurring expenses.
I have questions about that. I'll come back to that. So when we phase it out in the short term, there'll be some savings, right? When we phase out Revenue Stabilization Fund and move solely to the Budget Stabilization Fund?
So the mechanism would be to increase the cap of the Budget Stabilization Fund, to transfer $1.5 or $2 billion from the Revenue Stabilization Fund that's currently there into the Budget Stabilization Fund, so it'll be full, right?
How much does that revenue stabilization have now? About
It has 2.8 billion.
Okay.
And so the cost at 7.5% cap of the current receipts, if we raised the Budget Stabilization Fund cap to that, I think it would take about $1.5 billion or so to top that off. And so you would have money left over as well. The Revenue Stabilization Fund gets moved to statute, and in the statute, it no longer receives contributions. It just is kind of frozen there. That's where we pay out the money for the incentive for the opt-out from the inventory tax. And the thought is to use that as kind of a cushion for the credits on the corporate side that still get claimed in the future, because there will be, even if we phase out and sunset the credits, there'll be 10 years of people redeeming those credits over time. And so we wanted to have that cushion available to kind of smooth that out.
So on the Budget Stabilization Fund, what's the minimum that we'll have to keep in that fund?
So there's no minimum of the Budget Stabilization Fund. There's a maximum cap currently, the cap is 4% of state receipts, which is about $1.5 billion. And so, we raised that by about $1 billion. Part of that is to offset basically the loss of the Revenue Stabilization Fund. You maintain a bigger cushion now because you have more unreliable revenue essentially. But there is no cap.
Okay.
There is no minimum amount.
So you got 2.8 in the revenue right now, and what's in the Budget Stabilization Fund?
It's like 1.1, 1.1 billion, something like that. 1.06, I think.
All right, so that puts you close to $4 billion. After all of this is done, how much will we have in the Budget Stabilization Fund?
It'll be right now at 7.5%. It would be $2.5 billion
2.5 billion?
would be in the budget stabilization fund.
So by doing this, we reduce our rainy day fund by about $1.5 billion?
No, so the rainy day fund is the budget stabilization fund. So currently it's got $1 billion and it will have
But-
2.5.
Right now, we essentially have two funds. We have budget and revenue stabilization.
Yes.
Right now, combined, they have about $4 billion in them.
Yes.
After this takes effect, you have one fund,
Yes.
which will have $2.5 billion.
Yes.
So we're reducing our rainy day account by about $1.5 billion.
So the combined savings accounts, right? Obviously the revenue stabilization fund will go to statute, so we'll still have the balance in there. It just will be in statute, not in the Constitution.
But it'll be used to pay out incentives.
So it will be to pay out incentives. I mean, to the extent that those actually come, to the extent those exceed the corporate collections, right? And I don't know that that's going to happen because right now you have about a $600 million cushion on that as well. So, but to the extent they are claimed more incentives are claimed than what's available in corporate collections, you will use it for that.
Okay. All right. So moving forward with the budget stabilization fund, anything over that cap will be deposited into the general fund?
I know it will become, I think it becomes non-recurring. So basically you can use it for, I think there's 6 purposes in the Constitution, infrastructure, debt retirement, coastal projects. So there's a few other ones, but
But where's the money going to go? I get that it's non-recurring, but where would the money go? Not in specific areas of use, right? I'm asking, like, what account would it go into?
yeah, I don't.
Because I thought it said it goes into the general fund and is designated as
Well, it might go into the
non-recurring.
general fund for use
Right.
in non-recurring purposes, I guess, is how the.
Right, and that's what I think it does. So just had a question. So when the revenue stabilization fund was established, never thought we were going to be hitting that 600 million figure, right? So my question is, what if, year after year, you're exceeding that cap on the budget stabilization fund and depositing dollars into the general fund as non-recurring revenue? If it's occurring year after year, wouldn't that be recurring revenue?
It's for the 15% from the corporate collections is what you're
Yeah.
talking about? Yeah, so I mean, there is an element of it that will be recurring revenue. I mean, that is possible that happens. That's essentially what's happening right now when we're making this $1 billion deposit, right? At the same time, if the economy goes south and corporate collections fall, then their 15% is a cushion on that fall. So we've made a lot of changes to the corporate code that I think has made the revenue more stable than it was in the past. There was a lot of amnesty programs that were done, 10 years ago or so that I think made the corporate revenue very volatile, that we've kind of cleaned that up. So I think we can expect a more consistent corporate collections than we had in the past. At the same time, if that goes away, that's what that 15% cushion is about, is trying to alleviate the dependence on that amount of revenue.
Okay. Why are we, this is just, I'm curious. So in the ballot language, essentially we have two different options. If an amendment passes in December, we get one version, and if it fails, we get another version. I was just wondering why. Is that not accurate?
Mr. Secretary, you
I
mind,
think
I'm
Ms.
I'm
Little-
allow staff to.
Yeah, I think Ms. Little
reply
has
to
some
that, please.
context for you.
There we go. So what happened was last session, Senator Miller passed a provision that completely changed what is now Article 7, Section 25. That provision will not be put on the ballot for the voters to decide yes or no on until December, which is after we are through with this session. And so the intent, as I appreciate from Revenue, is regardless of what happens at the December election, they want to maintain Senator Miller's changes. So those are coded into the bill, and that's why the ballot language is different. It's just a question of what is effectively present law at the time the voters go to make their choice. That's tax sales? Yes, tax sales.
Yeah, that was the tax sale bill that we had last session. Representative Henry remembers that.
All right. Last question, and I know y'all touched on it yesterday, the centralized sales collections thing. is this allowing the legislature to create centralized sales tax collections in Louisiana without, it's not?
No.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, it's just clean up language just in case.
Okay. Thank y'all so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Chairman. Next, we're going to have Representative Bryant.
Thank you, Rep. Emerson and Chairman Emerson, and for the efforts to take some stress off of the school system and the retirement system, and also bring in, a lot of us ran on giving teachers raises and making it permanent. So that's going to bring some relief to all of our districts and our communities. And the teachers are pretty excited, so they could start pushing for another raise once they can get
Hey,
this one.
we hope we can get it done.
Hey, it'll be a
Locked in.
cheaper raise the next time.
Raise, right. So I hope that that is on your mind for the spring on trying to get them to the southern regional average while giving them a raise, a permanent raise versus the stipends that we've been having to deal with 3 sessions or 2.5 sessions. So thank you.
Yeah,
And when it's at the appropriate time, I'd like to move favorable.
Thank you.
Duly noted. Okay, Madam Chair, the board is clear, but before we go. Representative Landry.
That's a lot. Mine was pressed. I might have pressed the wrong one.
Yeah, it just showed up.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Sorry about that. The property exemptions. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so currently, property tax exemptions have to be included in the Constitution. That's part of the reason why the inventory tax changes have to happen with the constitutional language. This would move all of those basically out of the Constitution and subject it to a 2/3 vote, with the exception of the homestead exemption, which remain in the Constitution.
So if we wanted to remove all property exemptions on private universities, the legislature could do that by 2/3 vote?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Page 5, I was a little confused about this. Page 5C, it says a political subdivision shall levy a tax on retail use.
Page 5, you said?
Yeah, sorry. I was just, some of this language is talks around itself. Page,
Here we go.
was it page 5 of the bill? Yeah, page 5, section C at the very top, line 5.
Okay.
A political subdivision shall levy a tax as required by law. Does that mean they're collecting a state tax? I was a little confused by the language there.
No. So I mean, what it does is it makes the local tax base match the state tax base, and so some of the parishes have ordinances that say they're going to tax this and this and this, and they don't necessarily mirror what the state changes. And so because we're proposing to change the state sales tax base, this would let the locals just mirror that change.
So what would be an example?
So, for example, we're proposing to tax car wash as well. It might not be included in whatever their ordinance is if that's not included, because it's not one of the services currently taxed. And so this would just say that they will incorporate that tax into their base now.
But not charge a local and a state tax on car washes, or yes?
So the locals will charge the local tax on it, and the state will charge the state tax.
So if we don't currently, I don't know if we do, in Orleans Parish, charge $1 a car wash,
You don't.
but the state will.
Yeah, you don't.
Shocking, we don't.
You can't.
But now-
is the answer.
If the state charges car wash tax, then Orleans will also have to charge it.
Yes.
So 2 taxes.
There's a local, so every sales tax has the local and state portion, and so this
They have to
basically
do
just
it.
well,
Okay.
there are some exemptions that we give locals, optional exemptions, and so we're trying to clean those up as well. But this basically says that the base that the state uses will be the base the locals use as well.
Okay, and then section B on line 13, no new tax exemption or credit.
On page 13?
Sorry, no, line 13 on the same page, section B. No new tax exemption or credit can be, I'm sorry, the language is
Yeah, it's
confusing.
basically just aligning the 2 bases.
It says
the
basically we
local and
can't.
state.
I mean, you might remember we come in here and we'll pass local sales tax exemptions, and then we'll pass a state exemption, and
Right.
then they don't. That basically makes our code very complicated. So we're trying to clean a lot of that up in this effort, and so this would prevent in the future for us from passing a local exemption that only costs the locals money, or a state exemption that only costs the state. It puts us all in the same boat.
So if Orleans Parish starts charging extra sales tax on, coffee, 5% on a coffee, does that mean they can't do it unless the state also charges 5% on a coffee and vice versa?
No, it's an exemption. So if they went and
Sorry, that's what I mean. The
yeah,
opposite.
so if they said we want to exempt coffee in Orleans Parish, and they had a legislator bring a bill to exempt coffee in Orleans Parish, then the only way they could do that would be to exempt it across the state everywhere.
That's a big change.
That is why that's why our tax code is so complicated, is because we've done that over and over again for a very long time, so that in Orleans Parish, coffee might be taxed, in Plaquemines Parish it's not, in St. Tammany it is, and then the state doesn't tax it too. And so that is, I would say, one of the most frequent complaints for every business and for the administration of the sales tax code, is that the bases are not unified.
How does LMA and the Police Jury Association feel about that?
I can't speak for them. If they're here, they
Some
can.
of them are here.
I think they'll be here. Okay. I didn't quite realize that's actually what that was saying, but that's kind of a big deal. And then at the bottom of page 6, it looks like this is maybe setting up some language in case we pass centralized sales tax collection? Or does this set up centralized sales tax collection?
It does not set up centralized sales tax collection. It just adds the language in there, and if we do it.
If we do it. Okay. And a question on that, it says that the tax monies are going to put in trust and are the property of the taxing authority. I mean, I know we're not there yet, but was there any discussion of if there's interest, if you keep Orleans taxes for 6 months and the interest increases, what might happen to that? Like if you don't remit them right away,
On
centralized.
You mean if the state collects it?
If the state
is the collector.
There for a while, collects some interest. I don't know if there was discussion on that.
So, I mean, the discussion that we've had is putting actually a time limit to remit that back to them, and I think that could possibly be in an amendment coming up, but
Okay.
That's what the discussions have been so far.
I was just wondering. And then page 10, the cigarette tax rates, is that just moving it to statute?
Yes.
So we can raise it to $50 a pack?
I think that's actually a minimum. It's actually a minimum that's
That
in the
looks like,
Constitution.
yeah.
So
it sets a minimum.
Yeah. Motor vehicle license tax. I think someone asked about that already. Or maybe I'm wrong.
yeah, that just moves it to
The
statute too.
statute, yeah. I think that might have been everything. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Landry. Next, we're going to have Representative Lacombe.
Richard, I'm trying to read something. I was trying to print a letter, but I can't get it printed. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Secretary. My deepest apologies. I was trying to print a letter, but obviously I'm technologically declined, so I can't get it printed. But I got a letter from one of my superintendents, and I then was contacted by another superintendent. And so I don't know if this is the appropriate time to talk about it, but one of the pieces of what they're writing is what we're discussing here. So, and I know that we're dealing this package. So these questions are kind of, their concerns are kind of in more so, I guess, the whole package, but a component piece of it is being discussed here. So I do have some questions to see, because I know y'all have been working a lot more with all of the different stakeholders. But essentially, you know, parts of the component deal with the inventory tax, parts of the component deal with EEF, the Education Excellence Fund, 8G funds, the permanent pay raises we're talking about here, the UAL. So kind of the letter that the superintendent sent me basically was saying, you know, removing the inventory tax from our rolls here in the parish will cost us $1.9 million a year. And then she discusses the removal of constitutionally protected funding sources. The EEF and 8G would eliminate many resources that we've had to that have been proven to increase student achievement. The 8G funds have been offered to offer pre-K to economically disadvantaged students. Without those funds, the parish would be forced to relocate limited resources or discontinue. and then they talk about the permanent pay raises for staff and teachers, by what we would be doing through the unfunded accrued liability, paying that off. But I guess their concern was, it would not necessarily, it would place an even greater financial burden on the district and leave us without a stable funding source. So I know that y'all are dealing with this all over the place, but the concerns that they have is, not just with what we're seeing here in this particular bill, but also the 8G funds and the EEF. Like, what's the plan here? Because it seems like some of these pieces may work for some of the districts. If we're just talking specifically about the UAL that we're talking about here and some of the savings they'll get, but there seem to be other, when you take the whole plan together, they have some deep concerns. And I heard from another superintendent of a different parish, they're better off financially, but they also use the 8G funds and the EEF to do some of that. So there was concerns. The same questions from both sides, but when we look at the whole package in Globo, what are we doing to ensure that we're not putting some mandates on parishes that they may not be able to fulfill and essentially end up as a cut and basically just saying, all right, well, y'all figure it out.
So basically that payment from using the $2 billion that's currently in those educational trust funds, when you make that payment, it's going to save the districts $207 million a year, right? Which is more than the stipend that we currently pay them. So on net, they're going to have just on that measure, they're going to have a greater win on that. And that money, basically the Constitution requires them to give it's to use that money to give a teacher pay raise. And we specify in Rep. Bacalaw's bill that amount has to be at least to that $2,000 or the $1,000. Most of them will have more money if they want to use it to give an additional raise above that. But if they don't have the money, it specifies in the bill, if they don't have the money to make up that difference, then they don't have to give it in excess of that amount, right? So there's essentially mathematically impossible that they would have to pay something that they're not more than what they're already paying. But really what it would be is just using the savings from the contributions they no longer have to pay to the UAL to give that pay raise. On the 8G funds and the other funds that currently come from that currently basically it's like the interest on this $2 billion is what we use it for. Mm-hmm. I think overall that equates to about $25 million for K through 12 education. And that's money that, the legislature can appropriate anyway. It's not really constitutionally protected, except that some amount of money has to go to K through 12 education. It's kind of sprinkled throughout the state, but at the same time, you're looking at between the higher ed and the $200 million stipend savings, you're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars that we're not going to have to pay out as a state, and you're talking about backfilling 20. So the magnitude of the change is pretty, or the magnitude of what would have to be backfilled is a lot less than the magnitude of what we're currently having to pay, right? And then you're also providing for a permanent teacher pay raise versus a stipend that the state has been funding, which obviously is unstable. That's why it's been done as a stipend. And you're also reducing the districts get a net benefit from the fact that the cost of every teacher pay raise they give in the future will be 5 or 6% less, right? Because the contribution requirements for the UAL will go down. So I think it really is a net win for them across the board. I really don't think there's going to be a problem in backfilling those, that small amount of interest that really comes off of those funds. And at the end of the day, all of the taxpayers of the state of Louisiana save $1 billion in interest from doing this. And so if the argument from some of the local systems is don't do it, let us continue to pay $1 billion in interest, that's $1 billion in interest that they will have to pay, not the state, right? Because it's paid for by local contributions. They get money through the MFP, but they also are using that money now to just pay interest on the debt that they will not have to once we make this payment.
And so ultimately, when right now, currently in the Constitution, the EEF and the 8G funds, like you just said, it's not specifically mandated to an amount, but it is said that, hey, we have to contribute something. If we take that out of the Constitution and put it in statute, we don't necessarily know what the will of the body is going to be basically every session when we come up here. The legislature could, in fact, with a 53 vote or 70 vote, 53 vote, change that and say, all right, we're not going to allocate that money. So I guess that's where their apprehension seems to be coming from. So essentially, we'd have to make sure that every year that the will of the body would be enough that, like, all right, we're going to put this money in. Otherwise, they're looking at, and especially these 8G funds where is the most economically disadvantaged areas, they're benefiting from that. So, I guess that's their biggest concern. And I know you've heard it because you've been working on this for quite some time, but I think they're starting to wake up to contacting us and saying, hey, this whole packaging globally could be detrimental to us. Pay attention. And so that's why I'm asking these questions now, because I really don't know what y'all plan was as far as what y'all been communicating with them over the past months. And today's just the start of this. This process is going to go a long way from today moving forward. So I'm definitely okay with allowing this and supporting this out of committee and moving it down the process. But later down the line, if it comes up to where I'm seeing that, hey, we're gonna be crushing local education, I may have some more apprehensions about supporting this later. I just needed to know kind of where you were on the conversations. It seems like you have some type of a plan in place to figure out to ease their apprehensions. I just kind of needed to know what you were thinking on this.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, honestly, just to put in perspective, it's about, if we say we don't do this swap and we basically don't provide the teachers a permanent pay raise, and you continue to pay $1 billion in interest, basically to save $20 million in dedicated funds that could be appropriated by the legislature anyway. So, I mean, and also that even that $20 million could be changed by the legislature, because where it goes now is not dictated currently. So you really, would, I would say it would be a significant detriment to the systems and to the state and to the taxpayers to not do this, basically from I would say a real overall just a fear of change.
Yeah, and look, I tell you too, it wasn't specifically mentioned in this letter, but I think they're also trying to figure out what the ESAs are going to do to the public education too, because that's also looming in their mind of where kind of funding mechanism that's going to come in. But I appreciate your answers. I know you've been working on this with them and probably had much more in-depth conversations with those folks, but I'm just kind of relaying to you what I'm starting to hear from my people at home.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And I would just say those are similar concerns that, we've addressed with, multiple school systems. So it's not just yours.
Thanks.
Thank you, Rep. Madam Chair, the board is clear, but before we get into the cards, red and green cards, I'd just like to ask Mr. Secretary one quick question. And of course, the area that I represent, the rural parishes, which encompasses between New Orleans and Baton Rouge. You know how passionate I am about the inventory tax and that component. In the three bills that's going to be discussed on today from HB 2, HB 7, and HB 11 by Representative Desautels, all three of those bills has a certain piece or component that impacts the inventory tax. So if possible, if you can you just for the public's sake and for the board members, can you kind of elaborate on how each bill, what role it plays in ultimately repealing the inventory tax? So for example, HB 7 that we are on currently, it authorizes the payment for the one time to the parishes. I think HB 2 actually repeals the inventory tax, and then HB 11 actually provides the payment schedule. So if possible, can you just elaborate just for the public say as far as how that, as holistically how that process works or would work?
Sure. Sure. So the constitutional amendment basically provides for the mechanism to give the payment. I think the intent is also to have an amendment to basically guarantee that it remains voluntary, that the opt-out remains voluntarily and can't be forced by the legislature by a 2/3 vote in the future. And then the mechanism that actually executes that, the law that actually executes that payment is in Desautels, I think it's HB 11 that you're talking about. So that's where the payment actually gets made, and it kind of outlines how much each parish should get, and the kind of the other elements of that particular mechanism. And then the credit is actually in HB 2, and that's where the credit repeal is. And so the inventory tax credit going away would be in HB 2, and then basically the payment incentive is in kind of the basis piece of it is in the constitutional amendment what we're looking at now, and then the statutory mechanism is in HB 11.
Okay, and then one final question. So if HB 7 and HB 11, which are tied per the Constitution, or constitutional change, so that measure does not pass with the vote of the people in March, and HB 2 passes, which repeals the credits for inventory, would it work then with the legislature passing the repeal, and then the other two components does not pass the measure as far as the vote of the people? Then how would that work?
The inventory credit would go away as a credit against your franchise and corporate income tax, and then the local parishes would still not be able to opt out of levying the inventory tax.
But we also would obviously be back in a regular session right after the election, so we could address it
that
further
repeal.
there.
Okay.
Because the credit now, it would be phasing out June 30th of 2025. So we would technically be back in a session before that happened.
Okay, members, the board is clear. So we're going to move on with the cards, starting off with our white cards. So I'll read those into the record. So we do have Ms. Sadie Becknell with the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children, who is present and would like to speak. Catherine Davis, who's the director of TRSL, who is present and can provide information if needed. Ms. Shelley Johnson with TRSL, who's also present and can provide information if requested. And of course, we have our Secretary Nelson and Deputy Secretary Luke Morris from the Louisiana Department of Revenue.
Good morning, everybody. I am Sadie Becknell. I'm the Government Affairs Director and General Counsel for the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children. And for you all who may not be familiar, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization who is focused on providing independent research and data to you policymakers and stakeholders with regard to the status of early childhood education in the state. And our main focus is ensuring that Louisiana's youngest learners are prepared for success in schools and in life. So with over 100,000 children in need in the state without access to high-quality early childhood education, we're always concerned about any potential loss of access, which is why our initial reaction to the constitutional rewrite in HB 7 caused great concern. However, we understand the end goal, and we would appreciate a commitment from the legislature to make early childhood education whole when the opportunity presents itself in the state budget, and to work with the administration to secure the funds. And we will continue to do our part to work with everyone to find equitable solutions and funding issues that currently plague early childhood education. Namely, the 8G block grant funds are very essential to early childhood education, as previously mentioned, because they fund those school district pre-K programs for those children in need that's under 4 years old. And with that being said, there's currently 1,590 children who would lose access. And with the loss of access, it doesn't just affect the children themselves, but also their parents' ability to work. In that when children don't have access to quality education, their parents may not go to work, they may have to call in, and essentially they may have to quit their job. So with that being said, high-quality early childhood education programs prepare children for school success and career advancements, strengthens today's workforce, attracts businesses, boosts economic development. And thousands of Louisiana working parents can reliably participate in the workforce and advance their careers today because they can access affordable, high-quality early childhood education programs for their children. So this is ensuring not only a continuity of education for our children, but also for their working parents, which is what will determine our state's immediate and future success. So by prioritizing these investments, we can continue making steady progress towards a stronger and more resilient Louisiana. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ms. McNeil. Also, I'd like to read into the record a blue card that was submitted by Mr. Lance Maxwell, who's representative for the Governor, Jeff Landry. We now proceed on with the green cards. Ms. Scott Simon with the AFP Americans for Prosperity is in support, but do not wish to speak. Ms. Lauren Adams with the Pelican Institute is also here in support and does not wish to speak. Mr. Danny Ford with the FMOL Health Services is here in support and does not wish to speak. Mr. Daniel Esmeyer with the Pelican Institute Public Policy, who is here and would like to speak. You can make your way up. In addition, Mr. Jennifer McMahon, Louisiana Hospital Association, is here in support and does not wish to speak. And Mr. Keith Carville with the APL, who is here and would also like to speak. Remember, please state your name and address prior to beginning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I'm Daniel Erspalmer with the Pelican Institute for Public Policy. Thanks so much for the opportunity to share our point of view as y'all consider and debate this important package of legislation. As you likely know, the Pelican Institute is Louisiana's free market think tank. Our vision for the state is one where every person, no matter your walk of life or where you came from, has the opportunity to flourish. And we do this through research, through advocacy, through education, and we work, as you likely know, on a broad portfolio, broad range of issues. Central to the question of flourishing and opportunity is the tax code that governs a state. And we can see it clearly as we look across the country, which states' tax codes lead to more human flourishing, more jobs, more opportunity, and which have failed. You've heard testimony. I've had the opportunity to present to many of you in this body over the last 4 or 5 years of great task forces and working groups and subcommittees. Chairman Emerson, Speaker DeVilliers, Representative Reiser's in here a little bit ago. Many of you have done really terrific work laying the groundwork over the last 4 or 5 or 6 years. And as the governor pointed out, this has been a conversation really dating back 30, 40 years about what the future of Louisiana's tax code should look like. We know what the problem is. We see it every day. Our friends and family, kids and grandkids are leaving the state, the 6th highest outmigration of any state in the country. Even while those states around us are flourishing, jobs are growing, opportunities are coming there. Entrepreneurs create new opportunities for individuals to create a living and build a life for their family. We have that opportunity to do that here in Louisiana. The challenge of a broken tax code that is complex, that is hard to navigate, and that has well outlived its purpose in serving the state of Louisiana. So we come in enthusiastic support of a bold effort, a holistic effort to look at the tax code and to make changes that give us fair, flat, simple, and broad tax code. That's the objective from a policy perspective. From a reality perspective, we've run the numbers as we look at these, and we hope to produce an additional report on this before the end of the session as we see the final bills. But as we have run scores on this, what it appears to lead to, the projections are billions of new dollars in economic activity, thousands, if not tens of thousands of new jobs just in the next couple of years alone. And that's just by making these changes. As you continue to work to improve education, to improve workforce, all of the things this legislature has tackled, I believe this sets us up to have an opportunity for Louisiana's great moment. We should be an economic and an opportunity powerhouse. You know it as well as I do. 5 of the top 15 ports in the country, the most active natural gas sector, some of the most oil refineries of any state in the country, the mouth of the Mississippi River, great access to land, water, energy, and a people that can be found nowhere else. People come here by the millions to play, to hunt, to fish. Bless you, Mr. Chairman. And we know the beauty and the greatness of the state. We're underperforming. What we see presented here, particularly in the constitutional amendment in front of you, but broadly across this package, and I know some details will continue to get worked out as it moves forward, as it should. But this represents a significant, bold, and appropriate change to the tax code that can really lead us to a time of prosperity and opportunity. And I know that sounds fluffy and big and bold, but we see it in the numbers. We see what that can mean in real terms. So thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. Thank you for taking up this really important discussion. It's time to get Louisiana's fiscal house in order. It's time to really make sure we're living within our means and having a tax code that first answers the question, how do we help Louisiana's families and citizens? Instead of first asking the question, how do we help Louisiana government? And I think we finally have the answer to that in front of us. So thank you, Chairwoman Emerson, for leading the charge on this, and I appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Greetings, everyone. I'm Dr. Keith Corville, Executive Director of the Associated Professional Educators of Louisiana, and I would also be remiss if I didn't give a good shout out to my friend Daniel. I'm a proud graduate of Pelican's Leadership Academy. It's an excellent experience. So I wanted to go ahead and just tell y'all, probably the only thing I love more than a tax cut for hardworking Americans is a teacher pay raise, because no one works harder than teachers, and you all know that. But I'm here today first to thank you, and especially to thank Governor Jeff Landry and the governor's office, because this is something we could have done for decades, but through his leadership, this is now possible. And we have this, and this is the means to achieve those significant raises and also savings for districts. And now, I know I taught physics, so I can get real complicated with numbers sometimes, so I'll try to keep it simple. But I wanted to address two things. First, to Representative Willard's excellent points, I would note that you can get up to a 15.9% salary increase for all teachers and staff in districts and save districts money on that debt. Right now, you're looking with this current payoff a 4% raise, just estimated on the numbers. But you can get a 15.9% raise for the future years if you continue to commit the debt savings to teacher salaries at no additional recurring cost to the state. And I know that sounds wild, but instead of getting all physics on everyone, I'm going to just talk personally. I'm a big fan of Dave Ramsey. And when I was a classroom teacher, my wife was a classroom teacher, we started saving our money and we started paying off our debt, eventually getting to our mortgage. And we paid off our first house in 8 years. And that accelerated and changed our lives, because without that mortgage payment, we were able to invest in stocks, and y'all know they've been doing good, right? So that changed our lives. The second house we bought, we were able to pay off in 6 months. What you do today can set up districts and teachers for a compounding success. We always talk about how interest can compound and success compound, but debt compounds too. And we are being held back by the interest payments to TRSL, where 15.9% of an educator's salary has to be paid in addition to that salary merely to the UAL. This is our opportunity to get ahead. We can make Dave Ramsey proud of us in Louisiana. We can do that work. And I also just wanted to add too, from a rural district, grew up in a rural district, live in a rural district, strong supporter of public education. I know if you go through the Bessie reports on the 8G Fund and Educational Excellence Fund, you'll see that not every district uses these well. This money would be better to the teachers and would be better to saving money for the districts on those debt payments. And if anyone has any questions or concerns, I thought Representative Lacomb's questions were phenomenal and excellent, and we should always ask good questions. So if there's anything I can help to address any concerns on that, I know where the reports are. We can pull them up. We can look at them. We can try to find them money. We can point out the savings. And Representative Lacombe, I'll be jogging the Falls River Park on Saturday at 9 a.m. if you want to come jog with me. It's so great seeing us in suits instead of more casual clothes. Oh. But thanks again to Governor Jeff Landry, to his office, and to all of you for your commitment to permanent teacher pay raises. Thank y'all.
Thank you. Duly noted. Before you guys leave the table, we do have a question. Representative Wilder.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you all. Mr. Erspalmer, where does your organization stand on the 0.45, and how do y'all feel about trading it for an income tax cut?
Thank you, Representative Wilder. For those of you who were in the legislature the last term, you know that we were pretty vocal in opposition to renewing a temporary sales tax. Were this on the table as a standalone renewal of the 0.45, we would be here in opposition. What we have said from the beginning was go back all the way back to 2016, the point of that tax was theoretically to buy time to get the state's fiscal house in order, which includes addressing spending, includes addressing many of the things in this constitutional amendment. That had not happened. As it stands today, our view is to look at the overall package and make sure that the revenue decrease is at least as much as the 0.45. We're agnostic. In fact, would prefer lower income tax. If you have to levy a tax, the research would tell you that consumption taxes are a fairer, broader base tax to collect revenue for government. Income taxes tend to be more punishing to the economy and for opportunity. So it's a long answer to your question, but on net, assuming the package stays in a position where it is a net revenue decrease overall in terms of collections, and the trade-off is a lower income tax for the 0.45, we would remain in support.
So simply put, you're independently opposed to it as one item in a micro sense, but the macro of it being in the entire package and the other elements of the package outweigh the concern as it would be independent.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Wilder, and thank both of you gentlemen for coming and participating on today.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to read the red cards in the individuals that are here in opposition, and both of these individuals would like to speak. So if you would mind start making your way up to the table. We have Mr. Jim Patterson with Louisiana Association of Business and Industry. And we have Mr. David Lindenfield with Together Baton Rouge, who both are here and would like to speak. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Vice Chair and members of the committee. I am Jim Patterson with the Louisiana Association of Business and Industry, which is the State Chamber of Commerce and Manufacturers Association. I would like to begin my comments by complimenting the governor on his effort to address what has been for decades a major problem for this state, something that has held us back in terms of our economic growth and prosperity all of this time. And no governor has had the courage and the will to try and significantly redress the structure that is essentially broken for our state by any and all measures. We appreciate his willingness to do this, and we appreciate you all for being willing to sit down and try to do the heavy work involved in getting to a proper resolution. We particularly appreciate the Secretary and his staff for their hard work, their outreach, their engagement in an attempt to fashion this package that you all are being asked to consider. We are not, as such, opposed to the bill in Maine. Our problem with this legislation is, frankly, on page 3, and it deals with the power to tax and a limitation thereto. Language is being added to this instrument or to this provision in the Constitution, because this is going into the Constitution. It's not being removed from the Constitution. It is being placed in the Constitution. The requirement of a 2/3 vote in order to grant tax relief, a reduction in taxes. Lobby has for a long time had a position that it ought to be difficult to raise taxes on the taxpayers. And it ought to be as easy as possible to relieve them of that burden, to allow them to hold on to the hard-earned income that they obtain. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking about individuals or businesses. We feel like this is not necessary to this package's success, for this package to work. This is language that we understand is being placed in here to prevent a backslide, if you will. And we certainly understand that. We don't begrudge the view of the Secretary on this point. But we feel like you all, as you are undertaking this very difficult task before you, have the wherewithal to determine what is appropriate going forward. This committee would have to consider any new or the restoration of an existing exemption, exclusion, deduction, credit, etc. And we believe that you have the fortitude and the wherewithal, the intellect, to properly assess whether it is necessary. We do not know what the future holds in this regard. But putting the burden of a 2/3 vote on your ability to grant relief to the taxpayer simply makes no sense. And we have looked to find a state that does this yet. And it is difficult to prove a negative, but we can't find one. I would be interested to know if the Secretary knows of one. But this is not a good look for the state of Louisiana to say we're going to make it hard for you as a taxpayer, as a business taxpayer even coming to this state, to be able to obtain relief from the burden. So we would ask you to consider the possibility of offering an amendment that would just simply remove lines 18 through 23 from this instrument. Otherwise, we are fine with it as it stands at the moment. Those are my comments. I appreciate your kind attention. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you, Mr. Patterson. You do have a question, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Mr. Patterson, I just want to clarify something. I don't want anybody to be misled. You clarified a little bit further in your statement, but your leadoff, which I understand you're trying to make a point, but your leadoff was that it'd be a 2/3 vote for tax relief. Can you clarify what tax relief means in your mind in this instance?
Tax relief means anything that would give the taxpayer the ability to hold on to the incomes that they possess. You can do that through an exemption. You can exempt the taxpayer from having to pay the tax. You can allow them a credit in their income tax reports against the tax that they would normally otherwise pay. That is relief from tax. I understand the concern about exemptions and exclusions. I understand the animus towards them. I certainly appreciate that. But I think they are no different than simply dropping the rate of the tax, because the result is the same to the taxpayer. The taxpayer gets to
particular
hold on
industries,
to
yes.
the money. I'm talking about individuals. There are exemptions for individuals as well, as you know, Madam Chair.
I do.
And so all I am asking is that attention be given to this, because the taxpayers deserve to have an easy path to forgiveness of tax, and that's what this essentially is.
And I appreciate that statement, but wouldn't you agree, as representing the Association of Business and Industry, that one of the issues with our tax code is the complication of it?
Absolutely true.
And how bases aren't aligned on sales tax, and how many different carve-outs we have on the corporate side and the personal side, and that what we're doing right now in two different bills is trying to lower the rate, the corporate rate and the personal income tax rate, correct?
Yes, there's no question that is the intent of Bills 1 and 2. Yes, ma'am.
So I just wanted to clarify, as far as the representation of a 2/3 vote for tax relief, that we are trying to lower the rates across the board, and that's not for lowering the rates. That's for adding back in exemptions and credits.
I understand, but the particular provision in the bill, your bill, that we're talking about is one that is going forward. This has nothing to do whatsoever with what you are attempting to do or is being attempted with the package of bills that you are carrying. And I want you to know how much we appreciate what you're doing, and we certainly commend you for your efforts in that regard.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I just wanted to clarify your meaning of tax relief in this instance. I didn't want anybody to think that it's dealing with the rate. In this instance, it's dealing
It
with
is not.
credits
No,
and
I am
exemptions.
not. No, I did not mean to even for a moment suggest that. I have always referred to exemptions, exclusions, those things, deductions, credits. That's what it does. However, it still is the way that we have for a number of years now undertaken to relieve the taxpayers of a burden.
And I understand. I think we're trying to move to a way to relieve the burden across the board for everyone by lowering the rates.
And you and I are aligned on that, Madam Chair.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Lindenfield.
Yes, good morning. My name is David Lindenfeld, and I'm a member of Together Baton Rouge, where I chair a tax fairness committee, and I deeply appreciate the opportunity for letting me speak. I should say also that I'm a retired historian, having taught at LSU from 1974 to 2013, and I guess my remarks today are shaped more by my past career as a historian than my present attempt at being a tax wonk. So I'd like to go back to the narrative that the governor and the Secretary Nelson presented yesterday, that of attracting businesses and individuals to locate in our state through this tax package. This strikes me as essentially a linear narrative. Attracting businesses through lower taxes will have a multiplier effect on job growth, which creates the tax base for better schools, roads, quality of life, all of those things that put us near the bottom of so many lists. But it seems to me that this narrative is missing one thing, and that is a cyclical element, a boom and bust pattern, if you will. And I think that this cyclical element is thanks to a very powerful but as yet unnamed actor in the process, namely Mother Nature. We all know that Louisiana's location and topography make it vulnerable to repeated natural disasters, not to mention the erosion of our coast. And this takes a huge toll in human terms, in life, in property, and in wealth. So, regardless of what one's ideological position is with respect to the role of government, the fact remains that people turn to government for assistance in the wake of such disasters. And this initiates the cycle. It means in the past that federal dollars have poured in full blast, almost like a faucet being turned on, leading to the swelling of the state budget and to the temptation to reduce taxes, which is what happened during the Jindal administration. But this influx is not permanent. The faucet eventually gets turned off, leading to a reduction of revenues and thus to deficits. We're experiencing a similar cycle right now as a result of COVID and are faced with a similar temptation. Sure, we've learned some things from the past, and the Budget Stabilization Fund and its strengthening that we heard about is designed to address this. But my question is it enough? We can't afford to think that disasters will become less frequent in the future. All signs point to the opposite. So I would simply urge you to factor this cyclical pattern into your thinking as you craft this package, and to provide a sufficient revenue cushion for such an eventuality, which I believe the present package does not yet provide. Thank you very much.
Thank you to both of you gentlemen. Madam Chair, the board is clear. If you would like to close on HB 7 as amended.
All right. Thank you, members. I appreciate the lengthy multi-day debate and appreciate all your attention on it. I think we have mostly fleshed out all the details here. I know there were a lot. Again, this is really at its core an attempt to try to clean up our Constitution a little bit and put some of those items in statute where we can have it still requiring a 2/3 vote of the legislature. And obviously, it has a few more components of it that fit within the package. Obviously, dealing with the budget and revenue stabilization fund. And I think a huge component of this is also providing relief to our seniors with doubling the standard deduction on their side, and also removing the local sales tax on prescription drugs. So I appreciate your attention, and I appreciate Representative Bryant for moving favorable on the bill, and I'll close with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And as you mentioned, Representative Bryant did make a motion to move HB 7 as amended forward favorably. Is there any objection to that motion? An objection by Chairman Willett. So at this point, we're going to have a roll call, please, staff.
Madam Chair Emerson?
Yes.
Yes. Vice Chair Brass?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Bamberg? Yes. Yes. Representative Bayham? Representative Billings? Representative Bryant? Yes. Yes. Representative Eccles? Representative Farnham? Representative Gallet?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Chance Henry?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Lacombe? Representative Mandy Landry?
No.
No. Representative McMahon? Yes. Yes. Representative Myers?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Ogeron?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Selders?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Wilder?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Willard?
No.
No. Representative Young?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. The motion passes for HB 7 to move forward favorably as amended. Members, next we're going to move on to HB 2.
House Bill 7 by Madam Chairman Emerson. Yeah. Ms. Little, when you're ready, please read in the bill.
Sorry, sir. Yes, this is House Bill 7. It revises Article 7 of the Constitution of Louisiana.
Okay, back on the bill. Chairwoman Emerson.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. Of course, this is the constitutional amendment that Representative Desautel's bill is the companion for. I'll skip straight to the fiscal note. That's the reason why we're here. If you'll see on the first line there on the revenue explanation, because it doesn't have any numbers on the chart, but on the revenue explanation, you'll see that there's an increase to the state general fund, mostly because of the combination of budget stabilization, revenue stabilization of depositing that money in there and removing that $600 million cap on corporate collections. And so there is an increase to state general fund in that capacity and a reduction in statutory dedications because of that money not going to revenue stabilization.
Okay, we have some amendments. Would we like to go ahead and take up the amendments?
Sure thing.
Ms. Little on the amendments.
Yes, sir. Members, this is set number 50. It's available online, and I believe it's just been handed out. It's a grouping of substantive, technical, and conforming amendments. I'm only going to address the substantive ones, but if you have any questions about any of them, please let me know. The first one is Amendment number 1, provides more specificity on the definition of food for home consumption that is coded into the Constitution. Amendment number 2 delays implementation of the exemption on prescription drugs to July 1st, 2025. Amendment number 5 removes language regarding if LDR becomes the central sales tax collector and refines language that's in the bill regarding taxes collected on behalf of another entity and requires them to be remitted within 30 days to the owner of those taxes. Amendment number 6 deletes general language regarding limitations on severance allocations and replaces it with language that's more specific about what can be changed. Amendments 7 and 8 work together to add Mr. Guyman's growth limit to the bill. Amendment 10 removes the language permanent trust from the TTF fund because that is now going to be a term of art and will have implications that they don't want. Amendment number 11 requires airport TTF appropriations to be calculated as provided by law. If you jump to number 15 and 16, when I brought the conservation fund back in Ways and Means. I missed 2 edits that I need to make, so this is just making sure that their flow of revenues remains as is. Amendment 17 and 18 require budgets to conform to both the expenditure limit and the growth limit. Mr. Guyman's growth limit. Amendment 19 excludes public service land owned by a railroad from certain ad valorem tax rates and fixes a typo. Amendment 20 is a restriction on the legislature's ability to change ad valorem tax exemptions, exclusions, dedications, and credits. Amendment 21 prohibits the legislature from mandating that parishes exempt property considered business inventory from ad valorem taxation. And then jump all the way to number 35. And we've already talked about some of this already. It might be easier to explain in reverse order. So section 8, all the way at the bottom, is where we're prohibiting future deposits into these funds that are going to be used, or into funds that are going to be repealed. Amendment 7 is where we're allowing them, if you've got a current year appropriation from the funds that are going to be used to pay the teacher pay raise, you can still pull that money down. And amendments 6 and 5, harder to explain. So within the Education Excellence Fund and the Education Support Fund, there are monies held to the credit of entities that received appropriations before they didn't pull it down. So this is saying if you are one of those entities, basically you're going to get that money, and it's setting up the framework for how to do that. So transfers to the retirement system will be net of these monies being retained. And the rest are technical.
Would you like to discuss those amendments, or would you like me to go to questions?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, a bulk of them are technical, but you do have, we're trying to combine, to only have one constitutional amendment, so we combine the language from Representative Guyman's bill into this, so there would only be one constitutional amendment on the ballot. And then as far as, we added some language that I believe was a request from several local entities on the opting out on the inventory tax.
Okay.
We'll entertain any questions.
Representative Lyons for questions on the amendment or the bill?
On everything. Mr. Chairman, I want a point of order or some clarity. I know the other day when we had the bill come over, you kind of gave some clarification as to how did that bill end up in this committee. And I want you to do the same thing for this one first. And then I also have a question after that. Can you do that for me first? Just clarify how HB 7 is in this committee in appropriations. What's our role here with that one?
Well, on this one, it's impacting the funds. So when we have a funds bill, we're moving the funds now and changing them.
Okay, and that's okay. But the next question is, we have a lot of amendments here, and I'm listening to Ms. White, staff talk about how to explain them and what they are. But I do know that this bill was in Ways and Means. Is that correct? Correct. We basically amending the bill as this committee that we weren't privy to the presentation of the bill. So a lot of the amendments that we hear going through, my colleagues were looking at them, and we're trying to listen to staff clarify to us what it means and what it was. But the bill was presented already. So my question is, why was this not amended in Ways and Means where it was presented, instead of being amended here in appropriations, when our focus is on the funds that were changed?
I mean, look, it's a fair question, but obviously every stop that this bill has, you can amend it accordingly. So
I know that.
It's not improper to amend it in here.
That's my only question is, just as a committee here, when we amending this bill, majority of the amendments that are here, it's the first time any of us are seeing these amendments or seeing the actual substance of what the amendments are, which is why we're having so much explanation going on, because it's new to a lot of members and some things can be confusing. But nonetheless, that was my question, is to I know it can be amended every step of the way, but these are substantive amendments. These are not just all technical. So that was my questions, Mr. Chairman.
And Rep. Lyons, I think probably the most substantive amendment is to put Representative Guyman's expenditure limit language into this constitutional amendment, I think, which has already been heard by this committee, right? So
Yes.
I think that is I think the most substantive piece of this change is really just putting that part into the constitutional amendment.
Okay, and I asked that question solely, well, not solely, but partially because we try not to rehear bills when they come over and do a referral. So if we try not to, as a committee, and rehear the bill again, it's just kind of out of balance to say, well, now we're going to re-amend it. So now we basically can go through the whole bill again, because the amendments basically capture all parts of the bill.
I disagree with that. I think that all parts of the bill that are being captured, it's a lot of numbering changes. I think on this one, of course, as you know, the next stop for this is civil law, where we'll debate the ballot language. So we wanted to have the ballot language in its proper form before it goes there. And you guys did hear the substance of that bill, I believe, yesterday or the day before or whatever.
And in all fairness, the last time you came, I told you I had some questions, so I held my questions to offline. I didn't want to go through the whole thing in committee again that you just went through in your own committee. So that's why I'm asking the same question. We're here again today, and I could, I know you wouldn't mind answering all 20 of my questions,
Sure.
but I didn't want to, do that to the committee based on that. Yeah. But thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Chair, for clarifying.
I see no further questions on the amendment. I'll make a motion to adopt the amendment. Seeing no objection, the amendment is adopted. Back on the bill. Madam Chairman, would you like to close?
Not particularly, Mr. Chairman. I just appreciate favorable passage. I think we kind of explained how the numbers work here together.
Okay. I have several cards here, if you would indulge me. As a designee of the elected official, Governor Jeff Landry, we also have Susan Borges with Secretary of LED, present and willing to speak. Also Lance Maxwell, present, not willing to speak on behalf of Governor Jeff Landry. Present for informational purposes, Stephen Procopio is present, would like to speak. He's with PAR.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Steve Procopio, President of the Public Affairs Research Council of Louisiana. I'll try to be relatively brief since a lot of this has already been covered. PAR is one of the many things that we do. We write a guide to the constitutional amendments every year, and we have since 1953. Just to sort of let you know, there's been about 80% of the amendments that we have had since 1974 have been on Article 7. Article 7 is almost as long as the original 1974 Constitution at this point. It is the problem child of the Constitution. I think there was a lot of discussion about having a constitutional convention and a constitutional rewrite. I really think 90% of the issues that people wanted to deal with were in Article 7. There's been a lot of discussion over tax reform, but there's a lot of substantive, I think, very important changes that are happening in this article that deal with spending. I mostly want to talk about the so with a general sort of approach that I think there's a lot of really good things in here. There are a couple of things I just want to make sure you're aware of and bring your attention to, some of which have been talked about. The merger of the stabilization funds, the budget and revenue stabilization funds, it does a lot of major changes. One is you move a budget stabilization fund with about a $1 billion balance and a $1.5 billion cap to about $3 billion, which is important. Increasing that, almost doubling it, I think gets the attention of the rating agencies. It also locks that money away a little bit more securely. With a 2/3 vote, you could take money from the revenue stabilization fund. From the budget stabilization fund, you need a 2/3 vote and federally declared disaster or an officially recognized shortfall. So it makes the money a lot more secure, which I think the rating agencies as well as PAR appreciates. I do think you're also changing how money gets in there. You're moving from sort of a base amount in a hurdle. So, for example, with the revenue stabilization fund, anything over $600 million in corporate revenue gets put in the revenue stabilization fund. So there's a base amount, and then you get over that hurdle, and that's where the money goes. And the idea behind that is like an assumption that some amount of money is going to be stable. You can spend it in the general fund, and anything over that could be volatile, and you don't want to put it in your operating budget because it could go away as things get volatile. This is changing to a percentage, so there's just 15% of mineral revenue or 15% and 15% of corporate revenue will go in there. And there's pluses and minuses to that. The plus is that in low volatility times, when you have a low amount of corporate or mineral revenue, at least some money goes into the fund, and that's an advantage. However, in high volatility times, when you have large amounts of corporate or mineral revenue, you then would be using some of that money to put into the general fund, which I think could build some instability into the system. Looking at what Pew and others have said, you want to try and capture that volatile revenue and put it aside. And I think using a base system would probably be a good addition. I think you could do a hybrid that has both a percentage and a base system. I think establishing it now would be difficult. You have already about 20 balls in the air that you're trying to balance. So I think adding that would be difficult. Plus, you don't know exactly the hurdle amount should be. I also think you want to stress test for what your cap should be long term. That's something that Pew has recommended. It's doing that now while you're still trying to change corporate and mineral revenue. Well, it would be difficult. So I think you ought to reserve for yourself the ability with a 2/3 vote to increase the percentages that would go in, to establish and change a hurdle system, and also to adjust the cap upward. I don't go lower than $3 billion, but upward. And so then you can see in 2 or 3 years as things settle down, you could maybe make these changes that I think would improve the system, and Pew thinks would improve the system, but not have to go back to the people with a constitutional amendment, which I think a lot of what you're trying to do is to make the Constitution simpler. 2 other things really quick. On the coastal fund, one of the things that you're doing with that is removing the base mineral revenue that would go to that. So that's something you're going to need to backfill in some way, whether it's through a dedication, a constitutional or statutory dedication, or just appropriate in the regular budget. I think they need about $25 million for an operating budget and $25 million to pull down federal match. That's probably important to make sure that we do, especially as the congressional delegation is trying to argue for more federal share from the offshore money. For the UAL pay down, I think this is a really good idea. I think it will save us a lot of money. I think also the crediting rating agencies will really take notice of this in addition to the other moves that you're making. Just generally, we're using $2 billion to pay down a portion of the UAL, the earlier portions. This will save about $1 billion in interest payments. So for $2 billion, you're going to have a reduction in $3 billion of payments, which is a pretty good return. I will say, and I know I'm probably on an island on this one, I don't necessarily think you ought to put the constitutional in the Constitution that this ought to go to a pay raise. I think you should just leave it open, and then you can later appropriate it or handle it through the MFP. Not as many people agree with me on that one, but I just want to make sure we have it on the record. And then you've already discussed the need that there will be money going that other parts of what the original AG fund was going for will no longer have dedications, and so I would urge you to try and backfill those, particularly the Regents part, which is about $25 million, and then I think in early child education it's around $10 million, which there should be enough money for, and I heard pretty strong indication from the representatives of the governor that will happen, and so that gives me a lot of heart. But I think those are particular things, while you're doing all those other things, you got to juggle these small little bits that have to get adjusted. With that, hopefully I didn't take up too much time, Mr. Chairman.
No, sit tight. We've got a few questions. Representative Baralt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, and thank you for that comprehensive explanation. We're all swimming, and a lot of us didn't hear everything that happened in Ways and Means, so I do appreciate that. On the first thing that you addressed on having a hurdle to get over and then everything over that, with the new constitutional amendment with the new spending cap not to do the same thing, but not necessarily just from corporate, but that it would be more comprehensive?
So there's 2 things that happen, and thanks for bringing this. That's a great question. So there's the cap. So you're going from essentially $1.5 billion to a $3 billion cap, and anything over that cap would become non-recurring. And I should have mentioned that before, which does decrease the amount of volatility, because then money coming outside would not necessarily, you wouldn't build the base budget off of it. You wouldn't put operating. So that does also prevent you from overspending. I'm talking about money that kind of goes into the fund. So right now, money gets into the fund. There's a base amount of mineral revenue. If you go over that mineral revenue, then it goes into the budget stabilization fund. And there's a base amount of corporate revenue, $600 million. Anything over that goes into the revenue stabilization fund. We're moving away from that system and going to a straight percentage.
Right.
15% of mineral revenue over once certain dedications are removed, and 15% of corporate, which is good in low times because right now, if you're under the hurdle, no money would go into the fund. But in high times, and you would have a lot of corporate and possibly mineral revenue that wouldn't go into the fund now. It would be spent into the general fund before it even got in there. So that money would still be available to spend in the budget, which is wonderful. You can spend more money, but it's also the next year after, it might not be there. So not saying that a hurdle system is necessarily the only way to go. I think some combination of the two is probably the best thing, and to have that on your toolbox if you wanted to adopt that in the future.
I guess what I'm really referring to is with the new spending cap, we're going to be having a hurdle that anything over that for the total budget would go into non-recurring. So we're putting that cap on that piece of it, not in the same place, but over on the whole budget, we're not going to allow ourselves without a 2/3 vote to
You're
go
talking
over.
about the overall spending cap,
Correct.
not the cap in the
Right.
Yeah,
Correct.
I can see that. I would, and I think there's some merit to what you're saying. I still think, in terms of how money gets into the fund, we've shown that the hurdle system works in budget and the revenue stabilization fund. That's a pretty good method without robbing too much going. That I would still like to see y'all have the flexibility of establishing that in the future. And you're right, the additional one might also be helpful. I honestly haven't looked too closely at the most recent version of that, so I couldn't really speak to it.
Okay, thank you very much. And before I'm done, at the appropriate time, I'd like to move favorably, as amended.
Thank you. Representative Zarang for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Dr. Procopio. It'd be a lot easier if you put an R in the I before the IO in your name, but that's just for future reference.
I'll take it under advisement.
It's like Zarang. I know it's tough.
Zarang.
Yeah, I hear you. Appreciate you being here. And you raised an issue, obviously, that is near and dear to not only mine, but everyone should be within the state, especially along the coast in regard to the Coastal Trust Fund. And in the previous bill with Representative Desatel, we touched on it there, and the fund's there. And the fund is only as good as our ability to populate it and provide the funding. And that's where I think there is some concerns, because right now it's constitutionally protected.
Right.
And I agree. And I talked to the secretary, and I hadn't talking to Madam Chair about this, but I definitely want to talk to her more in regard to the bill. But as a way to solve that, unlike other agencies that don't receive state general fund, they do have fees and services that they're able to generate dollars. CPRA doesn't, and they rely on the mineral trust fund to keep the lights on and do projects. And the concern of mine is, and I think you referenced it, we have to find a way to provide the money that is going to be needed for the agency to do projects and keep their agency running. And I think we've talked about that, and hopefully that'll be the case, that we can incorporate a consistent source of funding. And I agree, the way it is now in the Constitution, it's a complicated, goofy, you practically need a degree in Euclidean geometry to figure out how to get the money, or even what happens to it when you figure it out. But that aside, it does need to be cleaned up and changed. So to that degree, I guess I'm taking the long way around the board to ask if there's a commitment on both Madam Chair, the Secretary, in terms of finding funds that are needed to ensure that CPRA can continue the work that they're doing now in saving the coast.
Yeah, of course. I think that's also a question for Chairman McFarland as well.
Well, I'm going to work on him next. I just want to make sure, since y'all are at the table, that is an obvious concern and a need that we need to address, and it's important. And as we change things in the Constitution, and I know we can't one-off these things. If we're going to do it, we need to do it across the board, of which, unfortunately, coastal falls into that realm. But by doing so, we need to ensure that they do have the funds that they do need, and I just want to make sure that that's put on the record, and thank y'all.
Right.
Thank you,
And to clarify, the coastal fund will still stay in the Constitution.
It's there.
It's just this very complicated dedication method.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I think even I'll add to that, I think the voters sent a clear message that in the last constitutional amendment that they want revenues dedicated and committed to coastal restoration. Also, I mean, I didn't have a card here, but if we really wanted to ask somebody a question about when most of this was written, he's sitting in the back of the room now, our previous Senate President Alario. Anytime he wants to come to the table and answer a question about some of this, it may have been some of his ideas. But welcome back, sir. Next is Representative Amadei.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was very excited when my colleague who previously spoke mentioned that you would need Euclidean geometry to figure this out, because that was actually my favorite school subject. So I guess, yay.
So now you have to figure out the funding formula for the coast.
Yeah. So what I wanted to do, though, was just have you, in your original remarks, you were going through an outline. And right before you talked about the UAL, you talked about the base mineral revenue.
Oh, sure.
I missed something there. Can you go back over your comments about it?
Sure. So this is what I was talking about, how the two stabilization funds, the Budget Stabilization Fund and the Revenue Stabilization Fund, they get their money mostly through what I call sort of a base and hurdle system. So for the Revenue Stabilization Fund, and I use that because it's easier to explain, there's a base of $600 million. And the idea is that you're assuming that you're going to get something like that every year that you can use in the budget, and it won't be disrupted too much. However, over that, it is sort of volatile. And so that money is then taken and put in the Revenue Stabilization Fund, so you don't spend it in the base budget, and it's available for emergencies. And there's a similar mechanism for mineral revenue, but it's a much more complicated system. It's basically, once you take out dedications, something like $750 to $950 million that you have to get over that hurdle. So the benefit of a hurdle is you can still use a lot of the money, but you're setting aside money that was more likely to be volatile. You're sort of taking off the tops. You're cutting off the tops and putting it aside for rainy days. And so that system tends to work pretty well, and a lot of states use that. And we're moving to a percentage system where regardless of maybe there's a lot of mineral revenue, maybe there's a low amount of mineral revenue, you're going to set aside 15%, which is great in low times. So there'll always every year be some amount of money that comes into the Budget Stabilization Fund. And that's a good benefit. I do think then you're probably spending too much money when you have really good years and you have increases in mineral or corporate revenue. You're probably going to put that money in the budget and spend it, and that becomes a little bit more open to volatility, and it may not be there in good years. So I think some combination, maybe not as high or maybe higher hurdle. So $600 million might be too low since you're also taking 15%. Maybe that becomes, I don't know, 800 million, something like that. Then the idea is you don't know what that is right now. These are all kind of arbitrary numbers. You'll have to see what the new tax system looks like, what the new corporate tax system brings in, what the new mineral system brings in, and then you're probably going to want to set something up, and you shouldn't have to go back to the people for that. It's sort of my main point.
Thank you. Thank you for going back over it. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Representative LaFleur for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for LFO.
Good morning, Alan Boxberger for the Legislative Fiscal Office. Depending on the nature of your question, I may need to call up another staff person, but I can make a go at it.
Thank you. Can you walk me through the impact? I'm looking at the note that this will have on local tax collections.
Okay, we're on the constitutional. Prescription drugs is going to be the main impact to them. This bill removes the local option to tax prescription drugs, and we don't know what that number is. The number that revenue has been using is $250 million on a statewide aggregate level. And trying to use that as a baseline to try to project back down to local impacts, but I don't think any of us really know for sure on a district by district or taxing district by taxing district basis what that impact is going to be.
Okay, thank you for your response. I was making sure I was reading that correctly.
Okay. Also, here in support, Laurie Adams, present, not wishing to speak with the Pelican Institute. Jennifer McMahon, the Louisiana Hospital Association President, support but not wishing to speak. There's no further questions, no more cards. Representative Baralt's made a motion to adopt House Bill 7 with amendments favorable. Seeing no objection, House Bill 7 is reported with amendments is reported favorable.
Call the meeting to order. It is November 11th, 2024 at 1:28 p.m. Ms. Gerizano, please call the roll.
Chairman Muscarella.
Present.
Representative Brown. Representative Carlson.
Present.
Present. Representative Carter. Present. Representative Chenevier. Present. Representative Edmonston. Here. Representative Egan.
Present.
Here. Representative Glorioso.
Here.
Here. Representative Speaker Pro Temp Johnson.
Present.
Present. Representative Larvadane. Representative Mellery.
Here.
Here. Representative Taylor. Present. Representative Turner.
Present.
Present. Representative Ventrella. Representative Wright. Representative Weibel.
Present.
Present. 11 representatives, and we have a quorum.
Okay. Before we start, Representative Guyman on HB 14 has requested that we voluntarily defer that bill. So, without objection, so ordered. Next, we'll take up HB 7. But before we do that, I'd like for Ms. Alonzo to explain why we're here today in the process.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, at the front of your folders, there's a memorandum just reiterating under House Rule 6.8A, the House Committee on Civil Law and Procedures authority to review ballot language and the election date for constitutional amendments. So for all other joint resolutions that do not originate in our committee, they are recommitted. So we can review the ballot language to ensure that it is simple, concise, unbiased, and easily understood, and that the election date is ensuring the maximum voter turnout. So under House Rule 6.8A, we are here today to discuss ballot language and the election date.
So to reiterate, we're here today to only discuss ballot language. Okay. Representative Emerson on HB 7.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. I did want to start out. So the reason that Representative Guyman was deferring his bill is because we actually consolidated the ballot language where we wouldn't have two separate constitutional amendments. So it'll all be one. So his language is being added into this constitutional amendment. Members, I understand it's quite lengthy here, but obviously we need to cover every aspect of what this bill does, what this constitutional amendment does. This is the Article 7 rewrite, so we are taking a number of funds and putting them into statute, and taking them out of the Constitution, putting them in statute, still with a 2/3 vote. Obviously, this is also where we make the payment to the TRSL and we give the permanent teacher pay raise. This is also where we double the standard deduction for seniors. This is where the sales tax on prescription drugs at the local level is prohibited. Let's see. I think I mostly covered everything. Of course, with what's happening with the budget stabilization and revenue stabilization fund, there's going to be a transfer from revenue stabilization to budget stabilization, and then revenue stabilization will be phased out over time. And I think I pretty much covered most things in there, and I will entertain any questions you have.
The board is clear. We do. We'll have Ms. Nguyen read the ballot language for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, this is a draft 6.8A report for House Bill number 7 of the third extraordinary session by Representative Emerson. It proposes to amend Article 7, Sections 1 through 28, and enact Sections 29 through 42 of the Constitution of Louisiana. HB 7 proposes to amend various provisions of taxes, including limitations, uniformity, revenue distribution, bonded indebtedness, state funds, and expenditure regulations. The proposed measure cannot be accomplished statutorily. The proposed election date at which the proposition is to be submitted to the voters is March 29th, 2025. HB 7 may conflict with HB 14 and Senate Bill 3. And out of the total joint resolutions introduced, which is 7, there are 5 that have been reported by other standing committees. This is for the first ballot language. There is a second ballot language that is predicated on whether the ballot measure number 4 on December 7th will pass, and I will do the draft 6.8A report right now for that. Basically, it's identical to the first 6.8A report, but I'm going to go ahead and read it. HB 7 proposes to amend various provisions of taxes, including limitations, uniformity, and revenue distribution, bonded indebtedness, state funds, and expenditure regulations. The proposed measure cannot be done statutorily. The proposed election date, which the proposition is to be submitted to the voters, is March 29th, 2025, which should ensure maximum voter turnout to the extent practicable. And HB 7 may conflict with HB 14 and Senate Bill 3. And out of these 7 total joint resolutions introduced, there are 5 that have been reported out by other standing committees. And the recommendations for both of the ballot language drafts is without amendments.
Okay. We have any questions? Why don't you go ahead and read the actual ballot language? It's in your packet.
Page 112.
It's a very small, simple bill, not very long. I mean, I can read the ballot language for y'all if y'all want. I mean, it doesn't matter.
Do you want to?
I mean, all of it in its entirety.
I'll let Jen read it.
Okay. So let me take a look at this. So like I said, there's gonna be there's 2 proposed ballot languages. It just depends on whether the ballot measure in December will pass or not. So this is the first. Do you support an amendment to revise Article 7 of the Constitution of Louisiana, including revisions to modify the legislator's authority to enact or change certain measures, require the state to pay certain retirement debt of the Teachers Retirement System of Louisiana, require payment of a permanent salary increase to certain school personnel from savings attributable to payment of retirement debt, require certain substantive provisions be provided for by law rather than in the Constitution, preserve taxes imposed and bonds authorized prior to any change in Article 7, repeal minimum rate for certain taxes, provide for ownership of monies collected by the state on behalf of others, modify authority of political subdivisions to levy certain kinds of taxes, modify calculations and remittal of severance taxes, modify provisions regarding calculation of ad valorem tax liability, authorize the legislator to provide for certain aspects of ad valorem tax by law, repeal provisions authorizing contractual exceptions from ad valorem tax in certain circumstances, authorize payment from the Revenue Stabilization Trust Fund to each parish that exempts business inventory from ad valorem tax, create new classes of funds in the state treasury, and provide requirements and restrictions thereon, designate certain existing funds as members of such new classes, repeal certain funds in their entirety, remove certain funds from the Constitution, modify operations of certain funds remaining in the Constitution, to restrict the legislator's ability to appropriate certain funds in certain circumstances, repeal provisions relative to dedication of certain mineral revenues, and make technical and conforming changes. And it says amends Article 7, Sections 1 through 28, adds Article 7, Sections 29 through 42. The second ballot language only adds something towards the end, which would say, instead of just repeals provisions relative to dedication of certain mineral revenues, it'll also have a provision that says modify provisions regarding tax sales of non-payment of property taxes. So that's the difference between those 2 ballot languages.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Nguyen. Any questions from the members? Okay, seeing no questions. Okay. Representative Carter for a question.
Okay. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand that we are concentrating on the ballot language, but do you have any idea how long is Article 7 in the Constitution current? How many pages is it?
I don't.
It's Article 7 of the Constitution, has to do with taxation. So I don't think it's 130 pages. This is 139 pages. And so
Right.
we're doing a lot of stuff in here. So in order to understand whether or not this ballot language is sufficient, it's reasonable, we have to understand the whole bill, what the people are being asked to vote on. Do you agree?
Can I make a clarifying point?
Right.
I don't disagree with you on the length, but please understand that a lot of this is strike through. A lot of the 130 odd pages are strike through because we are removing things from the Constitution.
Talk about what's going on the ballot. Okay, so.
And I gave a summary of what the bill is doing in the beginning, and I feel that the language reflects
What is the
bill is
effect?
doing.
Okay, so what is the effect of the bill in terms of revenues raised by the state?
Well, we discussed that this morning in appropriations, and there is the fiscal note published. And this passed out of appropriations unanimously.
So, is it what, some top secret or something? How much is it?
It's posted online for you to look at, but it's right now we have it's going to be more money going toward the state general fund whenever you dissolve or phase out the revenue stabilization fund, because there's no longer going to be the $600 million cap on corporate and franchise collections. So you are going to have more money going into the state general fund. The decrease would be from removing some of those those dedications going to revenue stabilization. So that obviously falls off, but you make up for it in state general fund. Obviously, you still have to make an allowance for the removal on the local level for the sales tax on prescription drugs as well.
Okay, so let's just take one thing, the stabilization fund. It would do away with the revenue stabilization fund totally?
Well, the
or
revenue
reduce it?
stabilization fund is going to be phased out because the balance in there is going to be used to pay down those that will be receiving the one-time payout from removing their inventory tax on the local level. Also, potentially to help buy out some of the contracts as well on credits rolling off.
And currently, how much of the money that's expected to be collected is allowed to be spent by the state? What percentage of the, don't we have a limitation how much can be spent based on projections of collection?
So right
Revenue
now, which I
Representative Carter, we have a point of order.
Okay.
Are we discussing the language of the bill, or are we talking about the language of the ballot?
We're supposed to be talking about the 6.8A report in the ballot language.
I'm trying to figure out how this ballot language comes up based on what the bill does.
Well, the ballot language doesn't really discuss the fiscal impact. That's what we discussed this morning in appropriations, and
But I think the ballot language should give the voter an idea what they actually voting on. Nothing in this ballot language says that this does it. That this I didn't hear reading it. That this language, that this bill would do away with the revenue stabilization fund that would be distributed through various items as directed by the bill.
It does mention that it authorizes payment from the Revenue Stabilization Trust Fund, and then it also talks about making revisions on Article 7 and putting certain funds into statute.
Well, I don't see why we couldn't do it in smaller pieces than to do one big old piece and try to get the voter to understand what he's really voting on, really expect him to understand what he or she's voting on.
So you want multiple constitutional amendments?
I certainly don't want this big, thick constitutional amendment. I think it ought to be something that the voters can wrap their head around and understand exactly what it's going to do or what it's not going to do. And so this does so much. It's almost impossible to write a ballot language that would be fair to the public for them to really understand what they're doing. That's just the way I see it. That's my comment.
Well, I mean, I do think the voters are capable of reading this and comprehending it, but I also believe that it is on us and other government officials who are supporting this to do our best to educate our voters on it as well. I know probably a lot of people in here, I know I've done this, as far as mailing out things to our districts to help explain what the amendments do.
All right, Representative Taylor for a question on the ballot language.
Thank you, sir, for allowing me to ask the questions. But my questions, you said a lot of people would understand it. I'm an attorney, and I'm having some questions with reference to the way this is stated. Some of the things that you've identified says authority to enact or change certain measures. What are the certain measures? To pay certain retirement debt. What are the certain retirement debts?
TRSL.
Beg your pardon?
The TRSL. That's the payment to the teacher's retirement debt to give the teacher pay raise.
Okay, but if you expect people to be informed and enlightened, I would tend to think that some of us may have a better hand on it since we're here in the legislature, and that some of us also are attorneys, but some of us are relatively new. So if you want somebody to understand and pass it, they need to know what you're talking about. And I see a lot of uncertainty because it seems like it's speculation or innuendos for me to fill in what certain school personnel, what certain substantive provisions. I think if for clarity purposes, if I would have difficulties ascertaining what that means, then what would the common person that sees it on the ballot, what is it going to affect? My next question after
Can I answer that one? Okay.
Yes.
Well, Representative Taylor, I think if you look on the third line, it says require the state to pay certain retirement debt, but you didn't finish the sentence where it says of the teachers' retirement system of Louisiana. So I think it spells out exactly the retirement debt that you're paying off. It talks about the permanent salary increase to certain school personnel. I mean, Representative Carter had a problem with the length of it, but if you want to lengthen it more, we can spell out that it's teachers and support staff. But this is literally for every teacher and support staff, which is what the current stipend is going to.
And if I may, I'd like to add to that. Ms. Alonzo has a Supreme Court case to let us know how that's going to lay out. Ms. Alonzo?
Yes, sir. Like I said, members, in the front of your folders, there's our memo on our 6.8A authority, and it also references a Supreme Court case, Hotard v. the City of New Orleans. Ballot language just has to have sufficient information for the voters to know whether they're voting for or against. The court stated that news publications and other things would give the voters other sufficient information so they would know more on the ballot language and what the bill has information-wise. So it just has to have enough information for them to know what they're voting for or against.
Thank you, Ms. Alonzo.
Yes.
Representative Taylor, do you have any more
Yes, I have
questions?
another question. With reference, it says that the Revenue Stabilization Trust Fund to each parish that exempts business inventory from ad valorem taxes. Okay. And I need you to explain that to me.
The inventory tax is considered to be an ad valorem tax. So as you've probably heard, this gives the locals the ability to opt out of the inventory tax if they so choose, and it sets up a one-time payment mechanism that Representative Desautel's House Bill 12, I believe, explains further the details of that payout system, but that's what this language is talking about. That if a parish opts out, which the amendment allows the parish to opt out of inventory taxes, then the payments will come out of the Revenue Stabilization Fund.
Okay, I've had calls from various parish officials in my parish, and they're quite concerned with reference to the inventory tax and how that's going to adversely affect, St. John Parish and St. Charles Parish.
Yes.
So
I understand.
Give me some more insight into that.
Well, Representative Desautel's bill, which is going to be debated on the House floor, it came out of Ways and Means. It's going to further explain that process. All the constitutional amendment is doing is allowing the locals to opt out if they so choose of doing the inventory tax. It's going to allow for payments to come out of the Revenue Stabilization Fund. That's the only thing the constitutional amendment is doing. The mechanisms and the details are in a companion bill that Representative Desautel is carrying. So he can further explain that on the House floor.
Okay. Representative Edmiston for a question.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Julie,
So, just to both of the representatives' questions, what's the downside of making more constitutional amendments? I mean, in other words, just say we broke this into two so that it could be more easily understood. Well, and obviously there's a downside, I just don't know what it is.
Well, I mean, most of this bill is dealing with Article 7, and so it is all within the same subject. We're doing several different things within Article 7, but it's all the same subject matter as far as dealing with Article 7 of the Constitution. And so we felt it would be better, and obviously Secretary Nelson would like to make some comments about that.
Yeah,
But
because I mean, you know, we get complaints every year. I'm one of the complainers. It's so difficult to understand for a lot of the public what we're asking them to vote on. And this, you know, is a lot. It's a lot for us. It's a lot for them. So, Richard, do you have something you?
Yeah. So, Richard
add?
Nelson, Secretary of Revenue, Representative Edmonston. So, the Constitution allows you to rewrite an entire article across the board. So that's what we're relying on right now to rewrite all this. Otherwise, you have a single object requirement, so you can only really change one thing at a time, right?
Okay.
And so if we did that, we could do all these things in 75 different constitutional amendments because each one of them may not be linked with all the others, right? So we could do a bunch of different amendments to accomplish all of these items, but at the end of the day, you can only do it with multiple objects. You have to basically rewrite all of Article 7, and so that was the reasoning behind putting it all together. Okay. It is a lot of change.
It is.
At the same time, I think that when they did the constitutional rewrite in 1974, I think it said, "Do you support the Constitution of 1974?" Like, that's all it said on the ballot language. It was not.
At least we're giving them a little bit more.
Let me tell
now.
you 500 different things in there. Yeah, so we tried. I mean, there is I think to all of y'all's point, there is an amount of detail that just kind of confuses people and they lose the overall point of this. And at the same time, we're trying to be at least clear enough so that if they want to know what's going on, they can see and read it. That's just kind of the rub in trying to accomplish this much change, period, is that I don't know there's another way to do it that's easier.
Okay.
And if you had 50 different amendments, chances are people's eyes would just glaze over and they would, vote yes on the first one and then no on everything else. So.
Well, that's why I asked you if there was a downside, because I knew there was. I appreciate the information. I'm glad that it's on the record, though. So hopefully the public will understand that we'd like to make it as clear as possible, but this is a big, huge, amount of information, and I guess doing the best we can.
And it's really reflective of how many things we've put in the Constitution, and that's been the kind of the age-old criticism, is that Article 7 of the Constitution is where, most of the amendments happen. I think Parr spoke on the committee earlier, and they said, oh, well, I think 80% of the amendments have been to Article 7. And so that's most of the changes that we're, trying to address in, kind of getting the public out of the business of having to vote on every time we change one of these things. And so this is a big change, but hopefully they won't have as many in the future going forward.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Bellarine for a question.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to report favorable.
Okay, we have one more question. Representative Brown for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. I would just like to make a comment that, with all due respect to the Supreme Court, we have a horrible history of explaining amendments to the general public. And despite Parr's best efforts every year to do that very thing, I believe on last year's ballot, we had an amendment to restrict or further restrict or clarify access to the rainy day fund. And the amendment read to allow for uses of the rainy day fund, and the general public took that to mean that we were opening up access to the rainy day fund, and it failed overwhelmingly. So I just like to point out we have a horrible historical record of explaining to the public enough how some of these amendments, and this is going to be a big one, but that's my only comment.
Yeah, and I appreciate that comment. I would just like to add, look, I completely understand. I think that we were trying to find that happy medium of making sure that we explained everything that the bill was doing. So I understand it's a bit lengthy, but I think that we covered most of the bases of what it's doing and tried to explain them to the best of our ability.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. The board is clear. We have a motion by Representative Bellarine to adopt the 6 point. What do you want to close?
I would just ask for your favorable passage.
Okay. We have have a motion by Representative Mellering to adopt the 6.8A report. Is there any objection to adopting both 6.8A reports? So we have an objection by Representative Wilfred Carter. Ms. Cherizano, please call the, here we're going to, vote yes is to adopt the report. A vote no is to not. Both of them in one time. Any questions before we vote? Ms. Cherizano, please call the roll.
Chairman Mascarello?
Yes.
Yay. Representative Brown?
No.
Nay. Representative Carlson?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Carter?
Is it Carter?
It's you on deck.
No. Representative Chenevier? Yes. Yes. Representative Edmonston?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Egan?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Glorioso?
Yes.
Yes. Speaker Pro Tem Johnson?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Mellering?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Taylor? No. Representative Turner?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Ventrella?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Weibel?
Yes.
Yes. Let's see. Where's the buzzer?
How many votes?
11 yeas, 3 nays.
The 6.8A report is adopted. Thank y'all for your hard, thank you for your hard work, and we have a motion by Representative Carlson to adjourn without amendments. The report is reported without amendments. Hold on.
Because we only did the adoption, right?
Final motion.
Hold on, sit back down, we have a little Claire, we need to do it correct. All these lawyers in the room. Okay, we have one more motion on the table. Representative Mellering has moved to adopt the report without amendments. Is there any objection to reporting the report without amendments?
Same objection.
All right, we have an objection by Representative Carter.
Why are we having another vote?
A vote yes is to report without amendments. A vote no is to not. Ms. Gerizano, please call the roll.
Chairman Mascarello?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Brown?
No.
No. Representative Carlson?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Carter?
No.
No. Representative Chenevier? Yes. Representative Edmonston?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Egan?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Glorioso?
Yes.
Yes. Speaker Pro Tem Johnson?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Just a-
Representative Mellering?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Taylor?
He'll come out of.
No. Representative Turner?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Ventrella?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Weibel?
Yes.
Yes. 11 yeas, 3 nays.
Okay, the report is adopted without amendments.
Next bill is House Bill 7 by Representative Emerson, joint resolution to revise Article 7 of the Constitution relative to revenue finance, power taxation, uniformity with respect to certain local state tax measures, assessment of property, items of taxation, remittance of certain tax revenues, provide relative to dedication of certain revenue, bonded indebtedness, interim emergency board, state bond commission, deposit of certain monies, provides relative to funds, appropriations, budgets, and investments.
Chairwoman Emerson on your bill.
All right. I know we have an amendment, Mr. Speaker, if we want to go ahead and take that up.
Madam Clerk?
Representative Emerson offers up set number 78, one-page set of amendments.
Chairwoman Emerson on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, these are technical and then some clarifying language requested from the Bureau.
Any questions on the amendment? Any objections to the adoption of the amendment? Hearing no objection, the amendment is adopted. Back on the bill, do we want to take up the next set of amendments at this time, or do you want to go on the bill?
Next set of amendments. Let's go on with the bill for now.
Okay. Back on the bill.
All right, members, House Bill 7 is the constitutional amendment, Article 7 rewrite, and so it is allowable for a rewrite of an entire article to be all within one bill. I realize it's a lot, but our attempt here was to streamline and modernize everything that was in Article 7, trying to remove some potentially unnecessary things that were included within the Constitution. Most of those funds we are moving to statute. I will read out a list of funds that are remaining in the Constitution for you. So the Bond Security and Redemption Fund, Budget Stabilization, Transportation Trust Fund, Coastal Protection and Restoration Fund, or CPRA, Wildlife and Fisheries Conservation Fund, Hospital Stabilization, Louisiana Medical Assistance Trust Fund, Unclaimed Property Permanent Trust Fund, and the Wildlife and Fisheries Conservative Fund, which is listed twice. Apologies about that. But for the most part, those particular funds, of course, the Budget Stabilization Fund, that is our rainy day fund. We do want funds in there to be protected and only used in the case of emergencies and all of the different reasons that are planned out in statute in the Constitution for uses of that. A lot of these other funds are remaining mostly because some type of federal funding hinged on them, and it was better to keep them in the Constitution after multiple conversations back and forth with several different agencies. So that is the reasoning on that. Most of these program funds that are being put into statute will still require a 2/3 vote for any change. So you'll still have that 2/3 vote threshold. This is also the bill where we are making the payment from the Millennium Trust Fund into the TRSL, the Teachers Retirement Fund, their pension fund, which will clear up quite a bit of money that we're paying in interest on that, and will enable the locals to give the permanent teacher pay raise, as well as to support staff, the $2,000 and $1,000 that is currently in the stipend, that will become permanent. This is also the mechanism to double the standard deduction for seniors. So 65 plus will get an additional standard deduction on income tax rates. This is also the mechanism where we are removing the local sales tax on prescription drugs. Louisiana and Illinois are the only two states right now that have any type of sales tax on prescription drugs. And we're really not like Illinois in a lot of ways, and so we're trying to get away from that. We only impose it on the local side, but we are removing that as well. And I think with that, Mr. Speaker, of course, we're keeping the Budget Stabilization Fund in the Constitution. We will be depositing more money into that from revenue stabilization, keeping a certain amount of money in revenue stabilization to phase out in the next few years, but we will use those funds. One use will be to pay down some of those credits that are being phased out on the corporate side, and then of course the personal side if you file as an S Corp, and then also to make some of the payments that Representative Desatel will explain when he does his bill on the ad valorem tax or the inventory tax that is being paid to locals. Of course, that credit's being phased out, and we're trying also to get that tax phased out on the local level as well. So another good point to point out, when the Speaker and I met with our municipal advisor that kind of advises us on things that help our bond rating, of course, we did have an increase in our bond rating recently. We went from, I believe, AA to AA positive, or maybe AA negative to AA. So we are increasingly getting better and better with that, and a huge impact on that is how much money we have in savings. So keeping that 25% of the state general fund in savings in the Budget Stabilization Fund will help us increase our bond rating as well. That was a lot of information. I will take questions now.
Okay, we have a lot of questions in the queue. Rep.
I'm
Mandy
sure.
Landry for a question on the bill.
Yeah, mine are just some of the questions from committee for everyone's benefit, not difficult. A lot of what's in here, just to make clear, is just moving items to statute, right?
That's correct, yes.
Like the centralized sales tax, we're just moving it to statute to determine as a body if we might do it. One of the
I just want to clarify one thing before we move on. On the centralized sales tax piece, there's the only reference to centralized sales tax in here was to make sure that we account for it if we do it down the road. We are not centralizing sales tax in this bill.
Correct. A lot of things that we're moving, we still have to pass with a 2/3 vote.
Correct.
But it's just moving it. It's a little easier. And one of the items that I brought up, it's going to be a local issue, or it was a local issue that I use, my water. If Orleans Parish wants to do an exemption or a tax credit on water because we have a new water company, we can't do that unless the state also does it. Is that my understanding?
Yeah, so another component of this, one problem we've had with our tax structure all along is the complication of our sales tax, where there are some exemptions on the local, some exemptions on the state. And some of those will remain, basically grandfathered in that we've had on the books. But moving forward, those bases will align. Yeah.
Right, and the grandfathering is good, but I think a lot of people in here don't quite understand that their ability to, give a little piece here and there for the firemen or for the local school board or for the the locks or something like that, they're not going to be able to do moving forward unless the state does, which I'm guessing is not going to be very common. So that's my question, is that they won't be able to do what they've been doing.
I don't know if that's completely yes on that, because I think that, as locals dedicate certain sales tax funds on the local level, and if they increase their sales tax number on the local level, they can still do some dedications.
Right, but if I don't quite understand a lot of the more rural areas, but I know a lot of them are very dependent on local money or local little millages, and if they need to raise something for the jail or something specific, it's going to be a lot harder for them to do so.
I don't necessarily agree with you on that, as far as if they're just trying to, if they added like a half cent for a certain amount of time, that's not certain deductions that are happening. That's just them changing their local rate.
Well, what I understood Secretary Nelson to answer with my coffee question was that I would not be able, after this is passed, to pass an exemption on coffee unless the state did.
That's correct, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Rep. Jackson for a question on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Chair Emerson, you mentioned the prescription drug issue here, and I raised some issues about that with my local government, and they were concerned. Has that been addressed in this bill, and if so, how?
So this bill does remove the ability to tax prescription drugs at the local level, yes. If you're asking me how it's addressed, are you saying like to make
Right,
up
I had
that
asked for some time for them to adjust, and I thought there was supposed to be an amendment that was, and if so, I just want to put that in the record.
Yes, I believe we have looked at that. I believe the start on that is, I believe it's February.
It says July 2025.
So, yes, actually, that was in the amendment we just adopted, so July 1st, 2025.
So we are giving them a soft landing. This is for them to kind of make an adjustment if they're able to collect the additional services, fees, and stuff like that. They can also continue to collect up until July 1, 2025.
2025, yes.
And
thank you for clarifying on that.
Is that provision contingent upon the constitutional amendment passing, or is this just simple statute that will give them that ability?
So particularly on that issue, if the constitutional amendment didn't pass, the ban on taxing prescription drugs at the local level is in the constitutional amendment. So of course, they could still choose to remove it. But I think myself and everyone else in here who supports it, I believe we'll be trying to pass the constitutional amendment.
So this is tied to the amendment passing?
Yes, because the ban on the locals taxing prescription drugs is being put into the Constitution.
Okay. I didn't I wasn't aware of that one. Thank you for the clarification. Thank you.
Rep. Lacombe for a question on the bill.
You wave.
Rep. McCormick for a question on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Chair Lady Anderson, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing great. On the teacher's pay raise, I've discussed my personal opinion. That's a local issue, and that's what we're doing. We're allowing the locals to give a raise.
That's correct.
Is there any going to be? Is there anything in there that's not going to allow the legislature to take up a teacher pay raise immediately? I mean, we're doing this to make this teacher pay raise permanent, but is there anything in there that gives us 2 or 3 years before we aren't allowed to maybe give it the teachers a pay raise? I guess my question is, even though we're giving this pay raise, someone can bring a bill to give the teachers a pay raise, even though we're doing this. Is that correct?
If that is the will of the legislature, yes.
You're right. So we're not. I don't know if we're buying ourselves any time here, but hopefully so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rep. Willard for a question on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Chairwoman Emerson, so I know the Louisiana Education Quality Trust Fund goes away in this bill completely, right?
That's correct.
Are there any other funds that are going away in this one?
So,
I know many are being moved to statute.
Yeah. So as we discussed in committee, those three
Education funds.
would be eliminated, but of course, I think it's the intent since we are going to recognize a savings to the tune of it's over $200 million, close to $300 million a year on interest payments. Whenever we do make that payment to the TRSL, the state's also going to recognize savings. So I believe the intent there is to make those entities whole that receive money from those funds.
Well, do you know some of the programs that are funded with those funds?
Yes, we've discussed early childhood, secondary education grants, endowments, things of that nature. Yes.
Teacher recruitment, administering LEAP tests, career readiness programs. Is there anything that should give school districts throughout the state comfort that those programs will continue to be funded, particularly the early education piece?
Yes, and look, I appreciate that question. Obviously, we'll take that issue up in the regular session when we have our budget, but again, we are going to recognize $300 million in savings, which is well more than would be needed to fulfill those needs. So, I mean, I'm not, again, we went back and forth on this in committee. I can't do anything about it other than tell you I know that that's the intention with that money. I think the argument really is just whether or not it should be in the Constitution or not. Of course, I think the goal of this is to try to clean up the Constitution and move some of these funds that really should be at the discretion of the legislature and the Appropriations Committee into statute.
Okay. On the teacher pay raise portion, do you know how much the average teacher pay would be in Louisiana if this is fulfilled and we increase it by $2,000?
So I believe right now, I know the Southern Regional average, I think is around like 56, 57. I think Louisiana is about $4,000 under that on average. And so I believe that, this will get us hopefully closer to that Southern Regional average in the mid-50s.
But even with this pay raise, they'll still be below the Southern Regional average?
A little bit under that, yes. And I know it's our intention to try to get them to that point.
And did you know that the Southern Regional average is about 10,000 under the national average?
I did.
Okay. So as we talk about some of these funds, I know that most of them are being preserved in statute, right?
Correct.
But I've heard from some organizations that are, I guess, kind of nervous about their funding mechanisms. And we actually received a floor note on one of those. Would you agree that many of these funds were established to basically protect the interests of that fund from essentially from the legislature rating those funds?
I believe that's probably the case, yes.
Don't you think that's kind of what we're proposing now?
So I don't believe that we're proposing to raid those funds. I think that we are proposing, because I mean, look, Representative Willard, you and I both know things get added on here, on this floor sometimes relatively easily. You know, if there's not a lot of back and forth on it, then it can, you know, easily be added to the Constitution in that manner. I think the reevaluation that we've done, you know, we haven't rewritten the Constitution since 1974. You know, we had a debate on that back and forth. That was not the will of the legislature to do that. And so I think this is allowing us to do a little bit of a reset on Article 7 and try to get some of those funds back into a place where the legislature can debate it in the appropriations process. I think when we tie our hands so much in that regard, you know, as you know, we don't have very much discretionary funding. And so in times of plenty or in times of very little, you know, we just don't have a lot of discretion in what we fund or don't.
Okay. So in this proposed amendment, we're also phasing out the Revenue Stabilization Fund, correct? And moving that to statute.
That is correct.
And can you explain what that fund will be used? I think it is permanently eliminated in 27, right?
That's correct. And so...
so through 27, what will we use that fund for?
So, yeah, as you know, there's a couple of items that we will be paying out. And so we are attempting to sunset some of the corporate credits. But obviously we have to fulfill our obligations of those that are still contractually have those credits. And so we will use some of that money to pay down such credits. And then also in our attempt to get the locals to work with us on eliminating the inventory tax for our businesses in Louisiana, we'll be using some of that money to pay down some of those needs.
Okay. What happens overall to the governor's proposed tax package if this constitutional amendment is not approved by the people?
I mean, obviously, we would like for it to pass. We would like for, you know, the legislature to have more flexibility in this, but fiscally, I don't believe it to be wholly detrimental to the tax reform package as a whole, no.
Okay. Can you still do the increase to the standard deduction and doubling retirement income and the teacher pay raise if this fails?
So obviously the payment, I mean, we can still do a teacher pay raise, obviously, but the payment from the Millennium Trust Fund is authorized in this language. So yeah, I mean, obviously when we come back in the regular session, we would need to deal with the fact that the amendment didn't pass and make adjustments from there, which I think, you know, we all understand we may have to do if it doesn't pass. But of course we want it to, and I would welcome your contribution to help it pass.
So currently,
I don't know what that laugh means.
The member is out of time.
I wouldn't count
Objections
on
to
it.
granting an additional 5 minutes here, no object.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So currently, we essentially have two rainy day funds, right? The Budget and Revenue Stabilization Fund.
That's correct.
And currently, there's about $4.5 billion in both of those, correct? Combined.
There's, I believe it's closer to 3.8 or 4 billion, but.
I think okay. And so if this amendment goes through, what's the minimum that we have to retain in the Budget Stabilization Fund?
So I think the goal would be to leave at least $3 billion in the Budget Stabilization Fund.
What's the amendment call for? In committee, we said it was 2.
To leave $2 billion or to put $2 billion in there?
The minimum balance for it. That's what I'm asking.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure that it calls for a minimum balance, but I believe the current balance in there right now is $1 billion. I believe the current balance in revenue stabilization is about 2.8. If you remember, we did with a 2/3 vote used about $700 million to fund infrastructure projects last session. So that's probably the discrepancy that you and I are talking about in the totals.
Okay. All right. And then in appropriations, we adopted an expenditure limit into this amendment as well?
Yeah, so we just passed Representative Guyman's companion bill on the government growth limit. And all that's in this, there was a constitutional companion to that. All that was added to this bill and that amendment was clarifying language to allow his statutory companion that we just discussed.
Now, so can we decide to kind of ignore that with a 2/3 vote of the legislature? Was I reading that correctly?
I think that that's a better question for Representative Guyman on all the
But
details.
I know,
But my
but-
understanding is 2/3 vote, yes.
So why would we put it in the Constitution if you can override it with a 2/3 vote anyway?
So the government growth limit itself is not in the Constitution. It just references that the legislature is allowed to establish one in statute.
Okay, I got you. Okay. All right. Thank you, Chairwoman Emerson. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.
Rep. Phelps for a question on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Emerson, so if we're looking at these three funds of repealing,
Yes, ma'am.
and they all have to do with education, we're eliminating these funds. And currently, I think there's about 140 public and private school systems that provide high-quality resources for children pre-K all the way to 12th grade from these funds. So what is the net positive? We're cutting these programs that could directly impact students if this is to be used for teacher pay raises.
Okay, so just to clarify, that's not being used for teacher pay raises.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
The money, so those funds are being eliminated in the Constitution, but my understanding from testimony in committee was that those funds collectively are, I think, under like $75 million collectively that they're expended per year. So again, the state's going to save about $300 million in interest payments, so we can more than make up for that discrepancy. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I don't know how, because I know we're asking how we're going to replenish the revenues, where it's going to come from if we're reducing the revenue that we have now. So if we're eliminating these funds, and maybe I spoke too soon, why are we eliminating these funds? Where would the revenue go besides just general funds? Because I think it was an intention, I believe it may have been intentional to dedicate these funds for education.
Sure, and I don't believe that the intention here at all is to not fund those things that are currently being funded. I mean, I know that everyone involved in those particular recipients, everything from higher ed to early childhood, I know they've been communicated with that certainly the intention with that $300 million savings that we're going to recognize that we don't pay in interest payments would be to make them whole.
We're repealing the funds.
Yes.
The accounts. Okay, so then we want access to those funds.
Well,
If
we're just not putting those particular funds in the Constitution. So, but all of the entities that receive funds from those could get a general appropriation fund. We're not, I mean, it literally is just removing those funds out of the Constitution, and then the Millennium Trust Fund is the one that's going to be making the $2 billion payment for the TRSL to lower that pension debt to pay for the teacher pay raise. And so these sub-funds of that would also be eliminated in the Constitution. But again, when we make that debt payment, because we're paying an interest on that debt payment, right, on the UAL, so the interest will be saving on about $300 million a year. So we can make those entities whole that are under those funds.
And I have concerns about that too. And maybe I'm getting confused because this is a part in your bill and a part in Representative Bacalau's bill as well that references teacher pay raises.
Yes.
But since we're here with you repealing these out of the Constitution, they will not be moved somewhere else. These funds will then be dismantled, if you will, and these funds will go into the general fund.
In essence, yes.
Okay, so then there's no dedication to our pre-K programs. We would have to fight for these funds like everything else from the general fund.
Yeah, and look, I think we give general fund money to early childhood every single year. I think it would just be added to that.
Okay, well, thank you for mentioning that. So since we have about 2,000 more students who will potentially lose their seat, because I think we've already reduced them about 700, what's the plan to ensure that these 2,000 students, what we talked about earlier this year, the pre-K students who potentially may lose their seats, what is the plan to continue, for them to have early education? So since we've been touting early education for the last couple of years, then what's the plan other than general funds so that we can potentially still, what's the word I'm looking for, that we can continue to fund
those
pre-K?
seats? Yeah, well, like Representative Phelps, I think if you'll refer back to what we did last year, obviously there were a lot of federal funds that supported early childhood that rolled off. And of course, there was a big ask from the state to fill that gap when those federal funds rolled off, which, you know, unfortunately, that's something that we have to do a lot. When the federal government will start a program and then they'll stop funding it, then obviously the next thing you do is come to the state to backfill that. So I think we, you know, fulfilled a lot of our obligation there last year. So I don't necessarily have any reason to believe that we wouldn't do the same moving forward.
Well, we have about 700 on the waiting list, so we did reduce funds last year. I guess I'm going back to what I mentioned before. If we don't have a workforce and we're not educating our children and starting it for some pre-K age, then we may never have a workforce if we're not investing. So it looks like now we're de-investing the funds that we have dedicated. And okay, if we have the funding in previous years, then we can continue to educate starting with pre-K. That seems a little contradictory of where we just were in this last session. And so I'm trying to understand so that I can go back and articulate, okay, we dismantled these funds, repealed these funds, but we have no real dedication of where the funds will come from again.
Well,
So
I mean,
what's the message we're sending there?
And, you know, one thing that has plagued the legislature for decades is constitutional dedications and statutory dedications. We have a lot of them. We have very, very little flexibility in our discretionary fund for the state general fund. I think Chairman McFarland would echo that situation as well. So
you're moving these to the statute?
These particular funds are not being moved to statute. As you
That's
mentioned
what I
before,
thought.
they're being eliminated. So, but my point is that we have both constitutional dedications and statutory dedications that certainly ties our hands and reduces our flexibility in funding. So I think the attempt, even with some of these other constitutional dedications we have, you know, it may allow us to free up some funds maybe that are not needed in some other fund. But again, we're going to have a net $300 million, or maybe a little south of that, but around $300 million in savings from interest payments. And so it is going to give more money when we make this TRSL payment, that we'll have more funds to be able to fund those things that you mentioned. I mean, I don't know what more I can give you to assure, because we're not replacing with another dedicated fund, but we are hopefully freeing up some money that will allow us to continue funding all of those programs.
So what are we saying to citizens?
Appropriations process.
Okay, so what are we saying to citizens when we are de-investing in education?
I don't think we're doing that.
The number one problem that we have.
I don't think we're doing that. We're giving a teacher pay raise and we're freeing up money to be able to fund those programs.
No,
so I need you to tell me how we're divesting. I mean, you're asking me questions, but I don't know how we're divesting from education.
Clearly, we're repealing funds that were dedicated for early childhood and education from K-12, from kindergarten to 12 and higher education to K-16. That's clearly what these funds were allocated for. So if we're repealing those funds and saying, oh, well, we might have funds in our general fund budget as we move forward, when these were especially dedicated for those reasons, and just this session, we reduced the funding, our additional funding for pre-K, with the superintendent saying, hey, how are we going to do that? There are 700 plus children on the waiting list. I'm sure more than that statewide. So now we're repealing that fund. That's clearly what I mean by de-investing, because there's not dedication there. And so if we don't have the funds, would it be fair to say that we'll have more children who will not have that opportunity for K4?
Representative Phelps,
Pre-K
you
4.
and I can go back and forth on this. I think we just have a
No, I'm
difference of
just-
opinion on it. But
I don't want to do that.
I'm not. No, like I am not arguing with you or telling you that you're wrong that these funds are being eliminated. It is clear in this bill. It is clear in the constitutional amendment. What I am clear about is that number one, we're giving the permanent teacher pay raise by making that payment to TRSL, and we are also freeing up around $300 million per year that we can spend on these programs that you're referencing and other things.
Okay, so
Because those programs do not make up $300 million.
They don't, but if there's no allocation for them, they may not even exist anymore. Again, we're trying to tell the public
But
why
the greatest
we're doing.
thing is we might actually have more money to fund more of the seats you're referring to.
I didn't hear you.
I said we
What'd you
may
say?
have more money to fund some of the seats you're referring to. I mean, that's certainly if that's the will of the legislature, and I think over the years you've seen the will of the legislature is to fund early childhood. We've continuously done it every year. Maybe not to the tune that you want, but we have funded it every year.
No, I don't have a tune. I'm just looking at the facts of repealing funds that were dedicated for such, and we're already behind and have a waiting list.
Members, I know we're excited to see each other. Hold the conversations down. Also, we're out of time. Is there any objections to granting an additional 5 minutes? Hearing no objections, the member has an additional 5 minutes. We still have 3 people in the queue for questions.
Thank you. Last point.
I did just want to make a comment that I am always excited to see Representative Phelps. So.
Yes, so am I for Rep. Emerson.
I am as well.
Last point, Rep. Emerson, you mentioned we're giving a permanent teacher pay raise. As I understand, that's a stipend. It's not in the MFP. It's not permanent.
No, that's
are we-
incorrect.
Ma'am?
That's incorrect. I just
Will you
want to
please
make sure you're
explain?
saying the right thing. So we are giving a permanent teacher pay raise in this bill from the local level. It is permanent from the local.
So it's are we the legislature or we the local levels?
The legislature is making a payment to TRSL to pay down the pension debt, which will free up money, and it is mandating a teacher pay raise in this bill.
Okay, a one-time teacher pay raise?
I'm sorry?
A one-time teacher pay raise?
No, it's a permanent teacher pay raise in perpetuity.
And what I mean by one time?
Level.
Okay.
The stipend is a one-time. That's not what we're doing here. It is because they will continuously see savings from us paying down that pension debt. So this is a permanent teacher pay raise moving forward. I mean, I'm not, that is the facts. I'm not trying to spin it. That is what is happening.
Okay. And you're referencing the amendment that was in committee this morning?
Yes.
Okay. And I did have a conversation with that about some colleagues. So again, the $2,000 pay raise that will be given with the potential of this bill passing,
yes,
that would just be stable for so long until the district is able to give an additional raise. Is that correct? The $2,000 that's given, that you're referencing in the amendment this morning from the Education Committee,
But the
that'll be a
statutory
one-time,
companion, yes.
that'll be this most recent pay raise, correct? $2,000 for teachers?
Yes, $2,000
Okay.
for teachers, $1,000 for support staff that will make that pay raise permanent.
So once that takes effect, and I'll just use the example of 2025, when they get this raise on top of the stipend that was given last session, that raise they can be at a $52,000 pay for years before their district is able to give them a raise, correct? Another raise.
Oh, another raise? I mean,
Yes,
that's up to
ma'am.
the districts.
That's
Obviously, the legislature has the ability to do that. The local school boards have the ability to do that.
okay. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that in my understanding that is just at this point, what I term that one-time raise that could last
Completely
a very
disagree
long
with
time.
you because they'll get it next school year, the following school year, the next school year. It's not going away. The permanent teacher pay raise.
But the pay would stay the same. If if they get $2,000 and my pay is at $52,000,
The stipend that teachers receive from the legislature was a stipend. This is a permanent raise that will keep that permanent.
and it'll be up to the districts to then give an additional raise after the one from 2020. We all get raises.
If they give additional ones, yeah, that's certainly up to them.
Thank you.
I mean, additional, but I mean, this is the permanent teacher pay raise that we're giving in this bill.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Rep. Bayham for a question on the bill.
Carter, did you get pay raises?
Chairwoman Emerson, I do have a question. As I mentioned in Ways and Means, I'm very concerned about the inventory tax. It provides 17% of our property tax collections in St. Bernard. My question is, as this bill is right now, we have Section 36 on page.
I'm sorry, Rep. Bayham. Go ahead, Rep. Bayham.
Okay. Section 36 of the bill on page 97 says that a taxing authority cannot be compelled to exempt businesses from the inventory tax. Will this clause, do you anticipate this clause being preserved in this amendment?
Yes.
And if it's not?
I mean, are you saying if the local option to opt out is taken away?
Well,
I think we doubled down in an amendment in appropriations to say that that is
Right,
the
but
will in the
once
legislature.
again, this bill is going to go to the Senate. It's going to come back, could have some amendments. I'm just very concerned because this represents a large, the inventory tax generates $13 million of revenue for St. Bernard that helps fund our police, our school, and our parish government.
So, I mean, Representative Bayham, I've had no indication from the Senate that they intend to remove this, but I'm not a senator. I can't predict what they're going to do. But, I mean, the intent and the will of everyone I've spoken to is to keep that optional.
Okay, thank you very much. We're just trying to reassure folks back home.
I understand. Thank you.
Jordan for a question on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Look, Rep. Emerson, my question is just a very simple one. I was reading through this, and are we getting rid of the cigarette tax?
No. There was a reference to the minimum taxation. It was more of a cleanup, honestly. There was a reference to a minimum cigarette tax in the Constitution. We're just taking that out. It's still in statute. The cigarette tax itself is still in statute.
But it would be taken out of the Constitution.
So the Constitution called for a minimum tax, so saying that you have to tax cigarettes and it has to at least be whatever the number was. There wasn't a ton of meat that went behind that. It was just, this is just a cleanup, and why is that in the Constitution? So again, that's still something that's in statute that we vote on here.
I understand, but
I
well,
don't think there's an intention to remove that tax through this at all.
but I guess it could be if you just want to remove it in the statute. You
We
wouldn't have
could
the
do a
Constitution.
lot of things in this building, you know?
No,
So-
well, look, and I'm not trying to necessarily be combative. My only thing, if you're removing it from the Constitution, then you could get rid of it in statute. Right now, you couldn't get rid of it in statute because it's protected by the
There's the
Constitution.
minimum, but I believe we charge more than the minimum at this point, so.
Right, and does it apply to vaping and e-cigarettes?
I believe if the statute covers those things as the definition of the cigarette tax, then yes, but I think there might be a different tax on that.
No, well, I mean,
I'm not sure it lines up exactly with
no,
the cigarette.
and my only concern really is, and I understand it's not necessarily part of this bill, but we got other bills that are coming up that we potentially are taking away taxes, and I'm gonna just call it like a sin tax. I mean, and then on the other hand, that we're going to start taxing, certain businesses and services. So I'm just a little bit concerned about that. But anyway, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Rep. Taylor for a question on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Okay, Rep. Emerson, my question is, pursuant to what Rep. Phelps had asked you about, is early childhood education a priority?
I believe that the will of this legislature has expressed that it's a priority year after year. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so my follow-up question would be, you alluded to the fact that the federal government had allotted some money for this program, and now it's going to expire.
It did actually previously. That was kind of the conversation we had last year about backfilling that.
So is the question that they should have funded it for an extended period of time, and that's why you're not going to recommend that it be renewed or that we fund it?
No, I don't believe that that's the question. I was just stating that it has been the expression of this legislature for the last year anyway, that when that rolled off, we did backfill that funding, and so I believe that the legislature has expressed the desire to continue funding early childhood. I think that what you're referencing is a particular fund in here that had some dedicated funding to early childhood, that particular fund, that particular sub-fund is being taken out of the Constitution and not put into statute. But I certainly believe that we can talk to Chairman McFarland about making sure those funds are replaced. And again, I think we are saving money by doing the debt payment that we are making. We're saving a lot of money in interest payments that could more than cover for that amount you're talking about.
So it wasn't your intention to implicate that because they didn't fund it for a longer period of time, that we should penalize or punish the children and not fund the program? You alluded to the fact that it should have been extended for a longer period of time.
No, I didn't say that. My reference to that was that the federal government funding that program, the federal government stopped sending the money, so it was the states, it was on the state to continuously fund early childhood at that rate. And I believe that we did allocate funding for early childhood last year, and I believe we probably will continue to do so.
So I hear you saying that because of the fact, is this what you're saying, that they didn't fund it for a long enough time period, so you shouldn't take it up? If education, early childhood education should be a priority to all of us. So if it's a priority, we're going to get miffed or have a problem because they didn't fund it for a long enough time period, so we're going to let it lapse. That's what I hear you say. Maybe I'm wrong. Would you explain?
That's not what I'm saying, no. I mean, I don't have control over federal funds, unfortunately, so... I mean, sure, it's great when they were funding the program, but, most federal programs that start, a lot of them do go away. And so it is the state legislature's decision of whether or not we continue to fund those things.
So we should have a cavalier attitude about funding education if it comes from a federal government source rather than from a local source.
I'm not sure how you got that from what I said, but no, ma'am, that's not what I said.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have no more questions, Madam Clerk. The next amendment.
Representative Zarang offers up a one-page set of amendments, set number 88 on your computers.
Rep. Zarang on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is a simple amendment. Essentially what it's going to do is ensure that the funding that's going to CPRA will have a 2/3 protection. The Coastal Trust Fund will still be there, but what populates the trust fund are the mineral revenues to fund CPRA. Again, remember, CPRA does not get any state general fund. So all revenue that is generated is used to keep the lights on. It's used to match federal dollars, to bring significant dollars, billions of dollars that we've allocated to projects. And so all this is basically doing is going to ensure that whatever is populated, the funds the Department of Revenue puts for CPRA will require a 2/3 vote of the legislature to change it, and that's what the bill does. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions on the amendment? Any objections to the adoption of the amendment? Rep. Emerson, on your objection?
Members, look, I understand Representative Zarang has always been a huge proponent of CPRA and protecting our coast, and he did come talk to me about this before, so it's not a surprise. I want to give him credit for that. I'm going to object at this time. I'm not telling you that this is not going to happen moving forward, but I think we just have to be really careful moving forward about different funds that go in and out. I understand he's not putting it back in the Constitution. He's just ensuring the 2/3 funding, but I think for right now, I want to keep the bill clean. I think the conversations will continue about this, but appreciate him bringing it. It's not a hostile objection. It's just I'd like to have a little bit more conversation about it.
Representative Zarang, you have a right to close.
I appreciate the fact that it's not hostile, and so I take that as a point. Again, I understand what Madam Chair is trying to do and wanting to keep it clean, but all I'm trying to do is ensure that the dollars for CPRA, right now, if the funds that will go into them, they can simply be changed by a majority. What they have right now, the funds are constitutionally protected. So they're keeping the fund, but the funds that are there that are constitutionally protected currently won't be with the change. So all I'm saying is we're not changing anything other than saying if we're going to change the funding that we're giving them, It's just going to take a 2/3 vote of the legislature. That's not asking for much. When the people of Louisiana spoke and said that this should be constitutionally protected, we're taking that component away. So to provide some assurances to the people who voted to keep it constitution protected, we're just establishing a 2/3 threshold to remove those dollars or change those dollars. And that's all this amendment does, and it asks for your favorable passage.
Rep. Zering, I know you're on closing. You have a couple of questions that popped up. Will you take any questions?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Okay, Rep. Jackson for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rep. Zering, if we vote in favor to make the 2/3 threshold for CPRA, which I think is a noble cause, which you support on a separate amendment for the Health Excellence Fund to do the same thing, a 2/3?
You're welcome to come put an amendment.
No, I'm
yourself.
asking what you support.
I'd have to look at the amendment.
I would do the exact same thing that your amendment is doing. It would.
Well, if your amendment would say would protect the coastal protection funds, you put that in there, I'd consider it. But at this point, this is just specific to CPRA.
Right. What I'm saying is, if we support your amendment to support the Coastal Protection Fund, will you support an amendment whether it has that included to support the Health Excellence Fund?
I ask if you please propose the amendment, and then we can talk about it.
Members, I ask that we not go back and forth on hypotheticals.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Rep. Willard for a question on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rep. Zering, basically, what you're saying would apply to all of these funds.
Well, I think you've heard Madam Chair say the funds themselves, the constitutional protections will still remain. This is separate and different to those other funds. It's not like the other, or the educational fund or the others. The fund is going to remain, but this is a unique funding applied to coastal protection funding that they use. It's oil royalty money that it's specific and different from any of the other funds. Those funds will still have a constitutional protection of 2/3 protection, but this funding won't. The fund will, but the funding won't. And that's why I'm just trying to capture the aspect of making sure that the funding.
You're talking about the funding mechanism?
Or the funds that are being applied from the Department of Revenue for CPRA.
Okay. Thank you.
Rep. Newell for a question on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Zering, I just want to get some clarity as to what we're trying to do. We just had a constitutional amendment that would state that the monies that's given to the state by the federal government for constitutional, for coastal restoration would be dedicated to this fund, to the Coastal Restoration Fund.
The money's already there. It's a formula. They're just simplifying the formula. The money that, it's not changing how CPRA will get the money. It's just basically saying, since the people constitutionally protected those dollars, this is just ensuring that if there's a change, it requires a 2/3 vote of the legislature. The money is, they're already receiving the revenue.
We already getting the revenue, and it's going to that fund, but we just had the constitutional amendment to say that that money would go to that fund and be only used for constitutional protections and restorations. With this amendment, are we now going to allow ourselves to use that money that's in that fund for anything else with simply a 2/3 vote of this body and not go back to the residents with a constitutional amendment asking them to spend that money in other ways than what they just told us they want us to spend the money on?
Okay, I see what you're saying. So the money that is there and allocated is specific for the purposes for coastal restoration and protection and the all revenue. If the formula is changed and the money that's now allocated to it would just be simple revenue for the state. All I'm saying is they will provide revenue, and Secretary Nelson is working with CPRA to provide the funding that they will need. And all this is saying is the funds that's provided for the Department of Revenue, to change it will require a 2/3 vote.
So basically, yes, to my question. If there's monies left over in the Coastal Protection and Restoration Funds, that money, we would allow ourselves to spend that money on general expenses with a 2/3 vote of this body and with no constitutional question to the people.
All revenue not dedicated or utilized to fund CPRA could then be used for other purposes. But this just ensures that whatever is provided to CPRA would have that 2/3 protection. The other money is going to be part of the general fund and be used however the state or however the legislature chooses to use it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Rep. Jackson for a question on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Rank, I just want, I'm sorry, I need a question on the bill, I'm sorry.
Okay, Chairman Guyman, I know you have your personal privilege press. Is that, it's an accident? Okay, members, we have Chairman Zarang has an amendment on the floor which Chairwoman Emerson has objected to. All those in favor of the amendment vote yea. All those opposed vote nay. Madam Clerk, please open machines. Members, vote your machines. Members, vote your machines. Members, you're voting. Rep. Mandy Landry, yea. Members, you're voting. The clerk will close the machine. We have 24 yeas, 63 nays, and the amendment fails to pass. Rep. Jackson, she's on closing on the bill. He waves. Madam Chair, you welcome to close.
Members, appreciate all the attention. I know it's quite a lengthy bill, and I just ask for your favorable passage. Again, I mean, if you have any specific questions about all of this, of course, you're welcome to come and ask us. But I think that what we're trying to do here is clean up Article 7, put a lot of these things into statute, obviously make our permanent teacher pay raise with the payment, which is really a smart investment because the amount that we were paying in debt and the amount that we were accruing in interest from having that money in there, it makes more sense for us to pay off the debt. And actually an added benefit is that we get to give the permanent teacher pay raise. So we just ask for your favorable passage and appreciate all the attention.
Emerson moves final passage of the bills. Many of your favor vote yea. Those opposed vote nay. Madam Clerk, please open machines. Members, vote your machines. Members, vote your machines. Members, vote your machines. Are either voting? Clerk will close the machine. We have Phelps, Rep. Phelps, no. Members, either voting? The clerk will close the machine. We have 81 yeas, 15 nays, and the bill finally passes. Representative Emerson moves to adopt the title. Moves to recess the vote. Bill finally passes. A motion on the table without objection, so ordered.
So let's move on to House Bill 7.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, of course, House Bill 7 is the constitutional amendment. I know we debated every aspect of this pretty thoroughly in the last couple of days. I can give a broad overview, but of course, the main motivation behind it was trying to clean up some things in the Constitution, Article 7, move a lot of those into statute, while still retaining a 2/3 vote to make any changes on those. It makes the payment from the Millennium Trust Fund to the Teachers Retirement Fund in order to give the permanent teacher pay raise on the local level. It also doubles the standard deduction for seniors. It also eliminates the prescription drug local sales tax on prescription drugs.
Okay, we have some questions by Senator Jenkins. Well, I'm sorry, before we go, Senator, let me go ahead and take up the amendments. Absolutely. So we can put those up for discussion. Ms. Klipinski, and let's go ahead and pass those amendments out.
Okay. It is amendment set number 95. It's comprised of 51 amendments. Amendment 1 is technical, as is Amendment 2. Amendment 3 restores the prescription drug language to the language of the current Constitution. Amendment, excuse me, I'm sorry. Amendment 5 deletes the new language related to prescription drugs, so it has the same purpose, or 4, I'm sorry. 5 and 6 are technical. 7 is technical. 8 is language that's being added to, check on that one, hold on, I'm sorry. Amendment number 9 is restoring the current date in the Constitution. Amendment 10, Amendment 10 puts language back in. There was a discussion that all the language had either been moved to the property tax bill or had been left in the Constitution, and we did find a chunk of language that had not ended up either place. So that's just restoring that language back to the Constitution. Amendment 11 changes the maximum individual income tax rate to 3 3/4%. Amendment 12 is putting current language back in the Constitution. Amendment 13 breaks out the severance distribution, breaks out brine as its own category instead of it being a part of other minerals. It has its own category with a 50-50 split between the state and the locals. That's Amendments 13 and 14. Amendment 16. Sorry. I apologize. Amendment 16. Amendment 16 allows the legislature by law to establish a fee, or actually it requires them to establish by law a fee for the geologic sequestration of carbon dioxide. Amendment 17 changes the date. That goes with amendment number 18. Amendment 19 is technical. Amendment 20 came from fiscal staff asking that to be included. It's just a technical change. Amendment 21 adds for state general fund for in a section. 22.
That's all in statute.
Removes language from the current, new language from the Constitution. Amendment 23 makes technical changes. Amendment 24 removes the dedication of 15% of corporate income and franchise revenues and some mineral revenues. Amendments 25, 26, and 27 are technical. Amendment 28 adds some language requested by the Attorney General's office for vote requirements that make sure we stay in compliance with the Master Settlement Agreement. Amendment 29 puts the Louisiana Fund back in a list of funds and then has another designation for any other funds. Amendment 30 is a request of the Treasury Department. It just puts a date in there. Let's see, 31 was also a request for clarification. Let's see, 32 through 38 are technical. 39 has to do with some other amendments in a different bill you'll see later. Actually, 39, I believe 40 and 41, that will go into the property tax bill that allows the parish governing authority potentially to opt to reduce the percentage of fair market value applicable to business inventory. So what we've done is broken out business inventory as its own class instead of it being an other property to make sure that there's no way it impacts anything other than business inventory. Amendment 42 and 43 are technical in nature. Amendment 44 adds current language back into the Constitution. Amendment number 45 is technical. Amendment 46 it's just adding in, it's mostly technical. 47 changes the vote requirement that is required when you make changes to property tax provisions that are being moved out of the Constitution into statute from a 2/3 vote to a 3/4 vote. Amendment 48 provides and puts back in the Constitution an ad valorem exemption for property owned by nonprofits operating exclusively for religious purposes, as either a house of worship, residential house for clergy, priests, or nuns, or a seminary or other educational institution, training individuals from religious ministry. Amendment 49 is the creation of a new local fund that may be utilized for any funds put in there to provide additional funds to the locals. Amendment 50 is technical in nature, and Amendment 51 provides a separate section with an effective date for any changes for severance tax allocation that it not take effect until July 1. It says 2024, I think.
Thank you. Thank you for that and for your work on that amendment. So these amendments, members, were given to me from various members of our committee and some from the department that they've asked to be put on to this amendment. I'll give you a real high level of what I understand these amendments to be, and then I may ask other committee members and the secretary to help explain as well on some of them. So one of the amendments I asked for is that we keep church properties exempt from property tax in the Constitution. So that's one of the things we did. This does allow locals to continue to charge prescription drugs at this point. We do create a potential fund to set up for locals or businesses to deal with the inventory tax situation. It does take away the cap, the severance tax cap for locals in the future. And there's something in here that the AG had requested for one of the settlement funds, which is technical. And I'm going to turn it over to the secretary to see if he has anything to add or if the chairwoman has anything to add.
Again, Mr. Chairman, obviously I was aware of certain parts of this. I didn't know all 51, obviously, but I can digest it a little bit later. But from the overview, it sounds much like things we talked about. So.
Yeah, and another thing it does too, we had talked with Representative Desitel, this does allow locals, if they don't want to go all the way to zero with inventory tax, they could go somewhere in between. It gives them some flexibilities. Let me turn to Senator Reese. Let me recognize it. There you are.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and you just hit on one of them that I had highlighted on here. Again, it continues to be, I think, the objective of the legislature and certainly Department in the state to continue to try to separate ourselves from the inventory tax. We put one more tool in that toolbox with this amendment to create the opportunity to reduce that percentage down from 15% to something lower than 15% upon the agreement of the police jury, the school board, and the sheriff of each parish. And then furthermore, we go ahead and establish this local revenue fund. The hope of establishing this fund is that we could ultimately put revenue in that fund to be distributed back to the locals so that ad valorem losses could be made whole within a parish. Because the parishes, in the event that they had an increase in the sales tax revenue, but they opted out of the inventory tax, you would create a loss for ad valorem collectors that wouldn't be made up by increase in sales tax. And so this would give an opportunity for an evening out of that process through this fund that would be established in the Constitution. And then it has the protections of that fund and the process in which it would be paid out and for what purpose, and the involvement of the Uniform Local Sales Tax Board for some oversight and audit oversight of that fund. So that addresses a couple more of the amendments in here, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Reese. I appreciate that. We do have several well, let me go to Senator Bass. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It also, in Amendments 13 and 14, we're hopeful of lithium in the northern part of the state. And so it goes ahead and defines what that split will be for that lithium if and when it's produced. It does not say anything about how it will be taxed. It just talks about how it will be used once it is. So that's the purpose of that amendment.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Jenkins.
On the bill? Are we going back to the bill at all?
We'll get there next. We're on the amendment now.
Okay.
Okay. So we have no further questions on the amendment. I will go ahead and make the motion that we adopt Amendment Set 95. Seeing no objections, those amendments are adopted. So we're back on the bill. Senator Jenkins, go ahead. Senator Jenkins has a question on the bill as amended now.
Not necessarily a question, just want to commend the fact and not overlook the fact of that double deduction for our seniors. I just think that's good news for them. I want them to hear that coming from the committee, and want to thank the secretary and thank the chair lady for making sure that our seniors are able to keep more of their hard-earned pension in their pocket. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that, Senator. We've got a few cards I'd like to read. Here in support, not wishing to speak, Scott Simon, Adam Knapp. Here in support, not wishing to speak, Larry Freeman from the AG's office, Lance Maxwell from the governor's office. Here in opposition, not wishing to speak, Deborah Salvador, John West, and Mary Ann Mashat here for information purposes and would like to speak. Donaldson Caffrey from the Independent Pharmacists Association. Mr. Caffrey? Welcome to our committee.
Good morning, Chairman Don Caffrey here on behalf of the Louisiana Independent Pharmacies Association. Just wanted to provide a little information on prescription drug tax that was originally included in the bill. Where we at with that, the local governments that currently tax prescription drugs, primarily on your seniors and your other folks, do that by classifying them as tangible personal property. That has never actually been to a vote for any of the committees or from anybody at the local level. And so that winds up being a sick tax on seniors and folks on fixed incomes that they are forced to pay on prescriptions prescribed by their doctor. Drugs over the counter do pay sales and use tax on, but those prescription drugs that are not optional for a lot of folks and they're required to maintain their health and that may lead to lower health care costs down the line do incur that cost. And because that's never actually been on a ballot, no local has ever voted on that. They just get combined as tangible personal property and then taxed sometimes up to 6% across the state. We've heard some testimony back and forth that Louisiana and Illinois are the only states that tax prescription drugs. We do see Illinois doing that in Cook County, and that's capped at 1% because our personal sales and use taxes vary across the state. That could be as high as 6%. So on behalf of the independent pharmacists, we wanted to come and supply that information to the committee, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
No, and I appreciate you coming in. Like the last bill that we discussed that Senator Reese and I both pointed out, at least I would like to see that exemption. I mean, I'd like to see that prohibition if we can get there at the end of the day. But in trying to balancing things out, the committee felt like we needed to put this back in for the locals at this point. So we'll continue to work with you to try to get that goal.
Well, yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, members, thank you for your time. Mr. Secretary, thank you.
Thank you. Chairwoman Emerson, I have no further questions or cards. Anything else you'd like to say about the constitutional amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate it. I appreciate Mr. Caffrey, and I think that that's something that we would all like to see restored, the exemption on sales tax on prescription drugs, and look forward to working with you guys and our local governments to get us there. So, thank you.
Thank you. At this time, the board is clear. I'm going to make a motion that we report House Bill 7 as amended. Are there any objections? Senator Bowie objects. Okay, at this time, members, if you vote yes, we will report House Bill 7 as amended. If you vote no, the bill will stay in committee. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Chairman Foyle?
Yes.
Yes. Vice Chair Jenkins?
Yes.
Yes. Senator Bass?
Yes.
Yes. Senator Bowie?
No.
No. Senator Klonick?
Yes.
Yes. Senator Lambert?
Yes.
Yes. Senator Luno?
Yes.
Yes. Senator Mizell?
Yes.
Yes. Senator Morris?
Yes.
Yes. Senator Reese?
Yes.
Yes. Senator Wheat?
Yes.
Yes. 10 yeas, 1 nay.
10 yeas and 1 nay, so House Bill 7 will be reported as amended. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I think that concludes your package.
The next bill is House Bill 7. By Representative Emerson. It is a joint resolution proposing to revise Article 7 of the Constitution relative to revenue and finance with respect to the power of taxation, including limitations thereon to require uniformity with respect to certain local and state tax measures to provide with respect to assessment of property and other items of taxation, provide with respect to remittal of some or all of certain tax revenue to local entities.
Senator Foyle.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, this is a very important bill. It's a big bill, and I think it's the whole reason we are here in November, because we hope to get this constitutional amendment on the ballot in March. And some people have referred to it as a rewrite. I would just refer to it more as a modification. It does make some changes. Article 7 is the fiscal section of the Constitution, but we also take things out and put them in statute to give more flexibility to the legislature. But we also retain some things that we think just need to be there because it's so important to the public to make sure those things are protected. I do have some amendments, Mr. President, if I can take them up at this time, and then I can answer questions on the amendments and then the Constitution.
Amendments sent up by Senator Foyle. They are set number 168, 168.
On your amendments.
Okay, members, this amendment does several things. We've changed the ballot language from when it came over from the House. It was more lengthy. We've tried to tighten it up. We've had numerous staff members review it and give us their input, and I think we have the ballot language in a good place. As you know, for the public to make a informed decision, we have to have good ballot language. We also, in committee, we had put on an amendment to allow parishes to charge a tax on carbon sequestration from putting things in the ground. We decided at this point we will address that in the next session, so we're going to take that out of this bill. We also had taken out originally the property tax property tax exemption freeze, or the homestead exemption freeze for those 65 and older and for veterans, and we were going to put that in statute and require a 3/4 vote of the legislature to change that. In other words, if you're 65 or older or a disabled veteran, you can keep your property tax at the same rate even as your assessment goes up. There were some concerns to keep that in the Constitution, so we're going to put that back in this bill. That will be in the Constitution. And that's what the amendments do. And there's some more things I can tell you about the bill, but that's just the amendment. So I'd ask that we adopt the amendments at this time.
I see no questions on the amendment. Is there any objection to the adoption of the amendment? Seeing no objection, the amendment is adopted. Back on the bill, Senator Morris for a question.
Thanks, Senator Foyle, for your hard work on this bill. Generally, as I read it through, it seems to modernize a lot of the language and kind of bring us into the 21st century, since it has become rather unwieldy, this article.
That's exactly right, Senator Morris. We have a lot of things in our Constitution that we've put in over time, and this is simply to streamline this particular section. We do still retain things in here, such as for a religious organization to still keep their property tax exemption. We could have put that in statute. We thought that was important. But a lot of things we felt like it would be better handled in statute. It gives us as a legislature more flexibility.
But that flexibility has a high bar, does it not? So it would take a 2/3 vote to alter a lot of those.
It would, and even for the property tax exemptions in committee, we actually upped that to a 3/4 vote. So you'd have to have a 3/4 vote of the legislature to change any of those exemptions that are in statute.
Well, awesome. Well done. Now, and the homestead exemption is completely preserved in this amendment.
Absolutely. We kept the personal homestead exemption in the Constitution. It's in statute as well, but the Constitution will trump that. So the personal homestead exemption for every citizen will remain in our Constitution.
And for those over 65, the freeze on that will remain in the Constitution.
It will. We had some debate whether or not to put it in statute or not, but we decided that we're going to keep that in the Constitution to make people comfortable. And so people over 65 and disabled military veterans who get the freeze, that will stay in the Constitution for the property tax exemption.
And assuming this does pass at the ballot, it will provide, it will still allow for the state of Louisiana to have a stable source of income from its taxation, but in a fair way that preserves what we as a state believe should be preserved.
Absolutely. So the things that we want to give tax breaks to, like a religious or a church, for example, we want to continue to give churches and places of worship a property tax exemption moving forward.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Klein-Peter for a question on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Does changing the name have any effect on the tobacco lawsuit settlement?
Does changing the name? No. In fact, that was something that the Attorney General asked me to do to make sure that we have that that settlement fund protected.
Okay. No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. There are a few other things, and I'll be brief, but I just want to highlight them because I think these are important, what we're doing with this bill. We are going to retain locals the option to charge prescription drugs if they want to do that. The state will not charge a sales tax for prescription drugs. We are going to double the standard deduction for persons 65 or older. I mentioned this earlier. So if you're 65 or older, Presuming HB 2 passes, which moves the standard deduction to 12.5, this would increase if you're 65 or older. Your first $25,000 of income would not be taxed. If you're married, your first $50,000 jointly would not be taxed. So that's a really big point, I think, for our citizens. This also eliminates certain funds, the Education Excellent Quality Fund. That's something we've talked a lot about, and the reasoning behind that is the money is not growing in this fund. We want to take that money and pay down the UAL and give locals, and actually mandate that locals give teachers a pay raise. And for some of the monies that we get from taking the rainy day and budget stabilization fund, which would also come out of the Constitution, we would just have one rainy day fund. We don't think we need two. We would be able to use that to help with the teacher pay raises for locals, districts that can't make that up, and also for inventory tax. One of the things we do in this Constitution is we give parishes or local government the option. You can charge 15% inventory tax. You can charge 0, or you can go somewhere in between. And part of this package is we are trying to incentivize locals to get rid of the inventory tax by helping them financially through some of the savings we'll see by taking these funds out. This also allows the legislature and statute to provide a government expenditure limit. And I mentioned it does move some of the property tax exemptions out, but the ones I've already discussed, religious organizations, were 65 and older, and disabled veterans will stay in. And it also unencumbers the dedication of mineral revenue for locals. So it's a lot of things, but I think good things that we're trying to do to give us flexibility. And if this amendment passes by the people on the ballot, there's more work we can do in the fiscal session coming up this spring. With that said, Mr. President, I've moved final passage unless there are any other questions.
Senator Full moves final passage of House Bill 7. When the machines are open, all those in favor, yes. Opposed, vote no. Madam Secretary, open the machine. Senator Morris, yes. Senator Klein-Peter, yes. Senator Seabaugh, yes. Senator Miguez, yes. Senator Carter, yes. Senator Owen, yes. Senator Couson, yes. Senator Reese, yes. Senator Boudreaux, yes. Senator Price, yes. Senator Presser, yes. Madam Secretary, close machine. 39 yeas and 0 nays. Bills finally passed. Senator Full moves to reconsider the pass the later motion on table without objection. Next bill.
Mr. Speaker and members, the House didn't receive a message from the Senate. The Senate has passed House Bill 7, returned with amendments respectfully submitted. Yolanda Dixon, Secretary of the Senate. House Bill 7 by Representative Emerson, joint resolution to amend the Constitution relative to revenue and finance, power taxation, uniformity with respect to certain local state tax measures, assessment of property, remittance of certain tax revenues, rates of taxation, and bonded indebtedness, revenue estimating, appropriations, budgets, publication of certain data, provides for certain funds within the state treasury. And Mr. Speaker and members, there were Senate committee amendments as well as Senate floor amendments.
Rep. Emerson on the bill.
Speaker. Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I'm going to start off really quick. Sorry to just read this, but I'm going to read, we adjusted the ballot language to make it a little bit more concise and hopefully a little bit more clear. So I'm going to read that to you really quick. Actually kind of sums up a lot of the bill as well, as it's supposed to. It says, do you support an amendment to revise Article 7 of the Constitution of Louisiana, including revisions to lower the maximum rate of income tax, increase income tax deductions for citizens over 65, provide for a government growth limit, modify operation of certain constitutional funds, provide for property tax exemptions, retaining the homestead exemption and exemption for religious organizations, provide a permanent teacher salary increase by requiring a surplus payment to teacher retirement debt, and make other modifications. I'm going to highlight a few of the changes that the Senate did. Unfortunately, starting out with the one I probably dislike the most. As you know, one of the pieces of this constitutional amendment was that we were going to remove the ability for locals to put a sales tax on prescription drugs. Unfortunately, we really just ran into an issue trying to work with some of the locals on this. But number one, we can obviously still do this in statute in the next regular session if we can reach an agreement with the locals. But we will continue to work on that, which is certainly a goal, I believe, of this legislature and certainly of this House as we supported it as it went to the Senate. So nothing's particularly changing about it other than we're just restoring the original language on that. There is some language in here that, so right now in the Constitution, we don't have income tax rates. Those are in statutes, but we do have a maximum level of income tax, and currently in the Constitution, it's 4.75. We are lowering that down to 3.75. Of course, that does nothing to change the fact that we just lowered the rate in statute to 3%. It just lowers the maximum level. Also, and Representative Guyman will probably speak to this as well with his language, but it establishes the allowance for the government growth limit starting in fiscal year 26-27. The only reason it cannot start in the next fiscal year is just because there's already budget negotiations and budget presentations going on for that fiscal year. Representative Guyman was in total agreement on that. And I'll also add that the governor did issue a letter saying he will issue a standstill budget anyway. We also did, there was a couple, we took the whole section dealing with property taxes except what refers to the homestead exemption, put it in statute, and that still would require a 2/3 vote to change. We did obviously run into a couple of issues. There were some concerns over the nonprofits that are operated exclusively for religious purposes as a house of worship, residential housing for clergy, priests, or nuns, or a seminary or other educational institution training individuals for religious ministry. We added that back into the constitutional language. We also added back the special assessment levels and property tax for senior citizens and veterans. That was originally just moved into statute and would still require a 2/3 vote, but we put it back in the Constitution. Like I said, we made the ballot language a little shorter and just concise and more to the point. I think it's better than how we started. We had a lengthy discussion about that in civil law, and I appreciated the feedback. And those are the highlights. I'll certainly take any questions. Of course, as you heard, this, this is the funding mechanism for the teacher pay raise that was in Representative Bacala's bill. We will be making that payment into the TRSL.
Judge Carter, for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I understand that we doing a lot of things in 7. Basically, we're reducing income taxes. We be taking some stuff out of the Constitution, putting it in statute. But what is the net fund change, income change for the state with regards to taxes, sales taxes? I understand the reduction in income tax and reduction in corporate income tax. That's all good. But how we pick up that money? How we make up the difference of the money, or do we? Is the new sales tax, for example, after it left the Senate? Does that generate more money for the state to allow us to pay for these other things we reduce in income tax and corporate income tax, that sort of stuff?
I'll answer that question, but all due respect, none of that is in this bill. So this doesn't mention sales tax at all. It doesn't actually change the income tax rate. It's only adjusting the maximum rate in the Constitution. Those questions are really more for Representative Wright's bill.
All right, I'm looking at this as one package. I mean, one of these bills.
I understand, but it's
one of these bills cannot accomplish what is attempted to be accomplished by itself. So it's a series of bills. So, could you tell me, as the chairman of Ways and Means, as author this bill, as it relates to other bills, one of which you author, what is our net increase in income to the state to pay for the other things we want to do with the other bills?
Again, Representative Carter, the fiscal note on Representative Wright's bill, which I'm sure is probably public, it will give you a little bit more clarity on that. I will explain the fiscal note on this particular bill, as I'm sure that's some of what you're asking as well. Whether or not the constitutional amendment passes, we certainly did make concessions and allow for that if it didn't pass. Certainly, as you mentioned before, we would have to take care of the teacher stipend or pay raise in the general fund. What this bill does and accomplishes is when you do merge those two funds, budget stabilization and revenue stabilization, and make that deposit into it, it also removes the $600 million cap on corporate collections. And so right now, in the revenue stabilization fund that we mentioned earlier, the overage, so anything over 600 million that's collected from corporate income and franchise gets deposited into the revenue stabilization. So when we combine those two accounts and that $600 million cap is lifted, you're going to probably see, depending on what REC recognizes, I'd say a net $300 or $400 million deposit into the state general fund just from combining those two funds. And that's what this particular bill accomplishes.
This bill would do away with some accounts that would end up making a net increase a few $100 million.
In my understanding, with Representative Wright's bill is after all of some of the exemptions were added back in, the adjustment in the sales tax rate and the personal income tax rate, it came out relatively revenue neutral.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Rep. Newell for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, Chairman. Could you explain to me what are we doing with the homestead exemption one more time?
Nothing. Leaving it in the Constitution.
We're leaving it in, we're putting it back in the Constitution.
Not putting it back. We never removed it.
Okay, because I'm seeing these amendments, and I want to make sure that people are clear as to what are we doing with these amendments.
Absolutely.
Because I've been getting a lot of questions about that. And then also the ballot language. And we're comfortable with this ballot language explaining everything to the people that we're doing with their vote of yes or no.
I am, yes.
Okay, because I'm not sure that this ballot language explains to people that we're not making too many changes to homestead exemptions. It's combining the exemptions to religious organizations in that same kind of clause as the homestead exemption. And
is it okay if I make a comment really quick? So the new ballot language says provide for property tax exemptions retaining the homestead exemption. I mean, I'm not sure how I can get more clear than that.
We can have that conversation, because this right here, I don't believe is going to be straightforward enough for people to really understand what it is that they're voting for, especially when we lump the permanent teacher pay raise in there as well. And all parishes aren't going to understand that their teachers might not get this pay raise at the level we've been discussing, and some schools might not, especially where I'm coming from.
They are all required to give the $2,000.
Especially where I'm coming from, where we have a 95% charter school district, and all the charter school students, teachers don't pay into this fund, so might not get that permanent raise. We're not discussing that. And I had another comment about one of these other statements, and I forgot it, but I'm really not really comfortable with this ballot language. I know we worked on it.
Well, and Representative Newell, I completely understand that. I think that, it is always a difficult task for us as legislators to try to, come up with something that is very, very clear and not misleading. I think that's what we did here. We had a lengthy discussion about it in civil law. Some people wanted it longer, some people wanted it shorter. So I kind of have to work with everyone in the middle to try to come up with the best explanation and not be too overly long.
Yes, but we do have to remember the people that we're going to have voting on this. We got 18-year-olds, we have older people, we have people of limited intellectual abilities that are going to be voting on this, and we need to make sure that when we're explaining something as this complex to our voters, and we want them to buy into it, of course, we need to be as clear as possible and not having any statements that are misleading to them, and maybe sometimes considering breaking it up a bit and not throwing so much at one time with the ballot language. And I brought that up because all of this is part of this bill, and this is the ultimate goal of this bill, is to try to get it passed. But when we're trying to explain to so many different demographics, we're going to run into some challenges with having our constituents trusting government when something this short can be seen as very, very complex and purposely misleading. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if you don't mind that I reply to that, First of all, I do not believe it's purposely misleading by any means. I think we did our best to clarify. I also think it's incumbent upon us as legislators, as I do every single election with constitutional amendment ballot language. We send out newsletters trying to explain. PAR puts out a constitutional amendment guide, and I think it's certainly incumbent upon us as members of the legislature here debating this to help our constituents understand it. So I appreciate your questions, but I look forward to working with you, and maybe we could do a town hall together to explain the ballot language to everyone.
Rev. Jordan for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rep. Emerson, I'm looking at page 97 of 140.
Okay,
And I think
on the
it's also
re-engrip bill, or?
of the bill, and then it's on I guess it's on 135 of 140 as well, that deals with the business inventory exemption payment.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you said, I'm sorry, say that page number one more time.
You can see it either on page 97 or 135.
Okay.
And it's section 37 that deals with the business inventory exemption.
Okay.
And it's just, I mean, my question is fairly simple. And it just says there shall be a one-time payment from the Revenue Stabilization Fund to each parish that elects to irrevocably exempt in accordance with law business inventory from ad valorem tax, and then it goes on.
Yeah.
So what is the exemption process according to law? Because I mean, I don't know what that process is.
Sure, and Representative Desautel's companion bill will have a little bit more detailed explanation, but it requires an agreement from the local entities to remove the exemption. And I actually really appreciate you asking this question, because there was some additional clarity on this. We are going to allow, and again, I think there's going to be a little more detail in Representative Desautel's bill, but to allow the locals to also phase it out, so potentially reduce their own rates to try to phase it out over time as well if they don't want to just cold turkey cut it out.
Well, so you say local, what local entities?
Well, I mean, the parish government, I believe the sheriff's involved, the school board.
Okay, so let's just assume those three.
Mm-hmm.
So so it'll be those, the sheriff, the parish council or police jury or whatever, and then the school
Recipients of the ad valorem.
those are the tax, right. So I guess my question is, would it go to the vote of the people, or would it be just those elected officials who get to make the decision?
Yeah, so again, Representative Desautel will probably be able to further answer those questions, but I believe it's really going to be up to the local entities of how they want to conduct it. I do not believe in his bill we make any requirements for a local vote of any kind other than those governing entities.
So if the people vote for this amendment, this constitutional amendment, this may be the only vote that they get as it relates to those exemptions.
I mean, obviously, in this constitutional amendment, we are giving the locals the ability to opt out of inventory tax. I mean, we can also make some changes here statutorily, but I mean, we are giving them that ability to opt out of it.
No, I understand, I'm just, again, I'm not going to belabor the point, but once the people vote on this, if they vote to pass this, then the ability to exempt a parish may be left in the hands of 15 to 20 people.
Well, Representative Jordan, I mean, we've obviously just debated and reduced and eliminated some taxes here with a vote of the legislature.
No, I get it. I just want to make sure that that's clear and that people understand that if they choose to vote for it.
Okay.
Thanks.
Rep. Phelps for a question on the bill. You have a right to close.
Members, look, I appreciate the lengthy debate. I know this has been a lot, but look, I think time and time again, we've been here in this legislature putting together budgets, and we have been hampered by how many constitutionally dedicated things we have that are locked up. I believe that this will give the people the choice to give us better budgeting practices. And, look, I think that we found some very creative ways to make the payment from Millennium Trust Fund to give our teachers pay raises. And this is the mechanism to do that. I appreciate your attention. I appreciate the questions. I know this one has been quite a beast. So I appreciate the attentiveness and just would ask for your passage, favorable passage.
Rev. Jordan, why do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I call for a lockout.
20 members join Rep. Jordan in a lockout. Madam Clerk, please open machines. Members, vote your machines. Members, are you through voting? The clerk will close the machine. A lockout is obvious. Quorum call. Members, vote your machine. Quorum call. Members, vote your machines. Guyman. Boriak. Green. Henry. Quorum call. Members, vote your machines. Boyer. The clerk will close the machine. We have 97 members present. Representative Emerson moves to concur with Senate members. Those in favor vote yea. Those opposed vote nay. Madam Clerk, please open machines. Members, vote your machines. Members, vote your machines. Guyman, yea. Boriak, yea. Jackson, are you a yea or a nay? Jackson, yea. Unlock his machine. Jackson, a yea. The clerk will close the machine. We have 86 yeas. 87 yeas, 11 nays, and the amendments are concurred in. Members.